Thank you so much. So, welcome to Mapping the Pluriverse. Welcome to the Dancing Otherwise Network. We're very excited to have everybody here for this inaugural event. And we're going to try and take it slowly. And we're going to try and have a welcoming, warm environment. We're also going to try and manage the tech. It's no one's favorite thing, least of all mine. So we will just try and do our best with it. So do bear with us. First of all, we should introduce ourselves. I'll just do a very quick introduction before we do a wider one. But we are the team from the Dancing Otherwise Network. Myself, Vicky Hunter. I'm just looking at my screen. We have Julia Pond, who is the project coordinator. We have Michelle Elliott from Bath Spa University and Daniela Perazzo from Kingston University. And we'll go around and do a bigger self-identification and introduction in a minute. So, anything else we need to do on the technical side? Just making sure we get people in. If you could just mute yourself, that would be really handy. I know it's horrible when people arrive at a meeting, then immediately asking them to be quiet, but just for our technical and help, it's just going to be useful. So we'll just start with introductions. I'm Vicky Hunter from Bath Spa University. I am the project lead for the Dancing Otherwise Network. For the last 10 years, I was at Chichester University. So some of you got emails from me from there. That's why I've now moved across to Bath Spa University. And Bath Spa is in the southwest of the UK. I'm a white woman in my middle years, wearing glasses with dark hair and a black top. And I'm in my office and I've got some books behind me. I'm going to hand over to Michelle.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to be with you today. My name is Michelle Elliott, she, her. I'm one of the network co-investigators, and I'm also based at Bath Spa. Visual description, I'm a 50-year-old woman. I've got brown skin, curly hair, glasses, a green polo neck. I'm in a quite bland looking room, and I'm really looking forward to the next couple of days and quite excited by the possibilities of what might emerge. Thank you. Daniela?
Thank you, Michelle, and hi, everyone. My name is Daniela Perazzo, and I'm based at Kingston University in Southwest London. I'm a 48-year-old white woman with an Italian accent, and also today with a slightly funny voice because I'm recovering from a cold. So my throat and my body feel a little bit sore. And this is all mixed up with the nerves and excitement of sharing this space and this time with you. Please forgive me if every so often I need to turn my camera off to just perhaps sneeze or blow my nose. Hopefully it won't happen too much. I think we can hear the audio from some of you, so if you could mute yourself, thank you so much. And I'm going to pass over to Julia.
Thanks, Daniela. My name is Julia Pond. I am a 46-year-old white woman with wavy black hair streaked with gray. My academic home is also Kingston University, but I'm calling in today from the west of Dartmoor, and I've got a blurred background because I'm a parent and my context can be unpredictable. I'm feeling excited and challenged by the opportunity to be part of this research network and in conversation with all of you as the project coordinator and as a core member. And I'm anticipating learnings at micro and macro levels, exploring how the idea of the pluriverse might relate to both our individual dance practices and our shared industry as a whole. So the Dancing Otherwise Research Network is beginning today, but it is going to encompass activities over the next 18 months with 7 events on and offline, which invite both dance professionals and our friends and colleagues from other sectors to join. So beginning today with Mapping the Dance Pluriverse, the network will continue on to explore choreographing and producing a dance pluriverse. And Vicky, I'll hand back over to you now.
Thank you so much. So as Julia's just said, our network is part of the Dance Research Matters network, which is quite a unique AHRC initiative started by Sarah Whatley and the crew at Coventry University and coordinated by VIP at Coventry University. So there are 5 networks, 5 Dance Research Matters networks, and do have a look on the website there to see what the other networks are doing and what their activities involve. For our network, we have partners. We're really excited to work with our partners. Sussex Dance Network, Southeast Dance, the Live Art Development Agency, and Fest and Fest. We also have an advisory board. We have Amanda Bailey, we have Kathy Turner, and Natalie Garrett-Brown on our advisory board, giving us advice along the way. So just a little housekeeping-y type thing, that the schedule for the day is on our website, dancingotherwise.com, and it's also on the Eventbrite. So if you get a little bit bamboozled about what's going on, please do not be bamboozled. The information is around and about there. And we also have breaks. Very importantly, we've got breaks along the way. So we're going to try and avoid Zoom fatigue. We understand that Zoom is not everyone's favorite cup of tea or favorite platform, but it does. We are fortunate in that it allows us to engage with folks from all over the world. So for this first event, we're Zooming it. Okay, so what is a Pluriverse? Why are we here? The next few minutes before we introduce our first keynote speaker, you're going to hear from the 3 of us, and we're just going to reflect some of our thoughts on what the Pluriverse is, what our pluriversal thinking has been up until now, just to give a little bit of context, and also some of the terms of engagement, how we want to connect and relate to people. Okay, so a Pluriverse, and I should also say, if you need captions, please, the captions are enabled. You can just click on the bottom there of your Zoom screen and enable your captions. So a Pluriverse describes a world of many voices, practices, and perspectives, both human and non-human, coexisting in an enmeshed manner, in dialogue with one another. It thrives and survives through equitable exchange and working together. Pluriversal thinking provides an alternative to the idea that anything can ever be solely universal. The Pluriverse challenges the idea of single truths or rules and opens up the possibility for multiple worlds to converge and coexist. Writing on decoloniality, the Argentine scholar Walter Mignolo identifies the origins of the term, the Pluriverse, as emerging from scholars writing about the Mexican Zapatista national liberation movement in the late 80s and early 90s. He says that it was the Zapatistas' own decolonial political version of a world in which many worlds would coexist that announced the Pluriverse. The first online event opens the network activity and involves dance practitioners, researchers, and producers alongside speakers from fields outside of dance studies, so philosophy, social activism, and ecology. And together we're aiming to raise our collective gaze, look across practices, sectors, and regions, to find points of connection where we can engage in creative conversations and find new ways to operate, relate, and be otherwise. This network emerged from our interest in dance and politics and a curiosity about the potential for dance to explore and provoke new ways of relating and being otherwise. Established arts funding systems, financial support for dance research, and institutional and academic systems of knowledge production replicate those neoliberal market conditions that set artists, researchers, and producers in competition with one another and keep us in our siloed modes of working. So this network looks beyond the mainstream to explore culturally diverse, environmentally engaged, experimental, edgy, and novel modes of making, producing, and researching dance that tell us something about the aspiration of artists and researchers for being otherwise. So we're talking here today about dance practice and research that reaches out to diverse groups or that seeks to edge its way beyond the mainstream. It might be based outside conventional theatre spaces. It might engage with diverse audiences and challenge conventions. It might ask difficult questions or propose radical ways of organising bodies in space, or it might invite non-human others into the creative process. We're interested in engaging with work and working processes that advocate for change, the decentering of dominant frameworks and discourses such as whiteness, ableism, heteronormativity, and anthropocentrism, in order to explore reimagining the UK dance ecology moving forwards. I should also say that if we are recording this and if you'd rather not have your camera on, rather not be recorded, then please switch your camera off. And I think there's something else I forgot to mention. No, all good. Okay, so that's a little bit of a blurb about the pluriversal thinking. Passing on to Michelle.
Oh, thank you, Vicky. So lovely to be with you all today. And as we come together as a group, it's at a period in our history that can perhaps be defined by the fact that there's a real rapid pace of change and where we have a real deluge of information and many people are trying to grapple with understanding what's happening in the world and what is the deep meaning of these events. And I know that I personally had lots of conversations with dance practitioners who are grappling with how to reconcile these kind of great social, political, economic, and ecological challenges of the present time with our own internal lives, practices, experiences, and aspirations. Now, one of the unique cognitive capacities that appears to be most distinct to humans is our ability to engage in collective imaginings. And so today's an invitation to come together and participate in some conversations around some of these issues and concerns. When we think about conversations can be very varied because we can talk to share ideas, to express experiences and feelings, to challenge, persuade, and to comfort others. And we've talked as a network about what makes a good conversation. And Paul Grice, who was a British philosopher, suggested that a good conversation is a cooperative enterprise rather than a series of disconnected remarks. So we've been talking about how we can negotiate and navigate conversations that have a cooperative spirit, particularly when we're with a group of people who might have a real proliferation of viewpoints and experiences. And we've been considering how in today's conversation, we try to work out what is it we're attempting to direct our collective attention to. We certainly hope these 2 days are about listening to a diverse range of perspectives, about how people see their practices and experiences within the concept of the dance pluriverse, which is a world of many entangled voices. Now, there are some things that are worth acknowledging that are implicit in what we're attempting to do. The first is that we see conversation as being really valuable because it connects us to others. We're anticipating we will see different conversational styles and attitudes, responses to the topic. And we're considering how we allow all these differences to coexist and connect us rather than to create a kind of distance or polarization when differences emerge. You know, we consider how do we all hold on to our own passionately held views without becoming intolerant of the views of others. And the aim of this project is to establish a network. So our conversations, we hope, are about building dialogue, exchange, connection. They're certainly not about creating a consensus around some artificial hierarchy of ideas. And we should know that it's really important that we're explicit about some power dynamics which are inherent in this conversation. You know, here we do need to acknowledge that as the network investigators we are situated in and also limited by our positions working in UK higher education with all its historical power and frameworks. So escaping the colonial mindsets which are inherent in the organisations in which we work can be really difficult. So we're mindful that dominant thought patterns and assumptions might keep returning uninvited. But we definitely want to find a space where we can attempt to slow down, to allow space to listen to each other. And as Barbara Siebert and Maggie Bird suggest in their book, The Slow Professor, slowing down is about finding a way that you can allow room for others and others otherness. And so in that sense, slowing down is, we see it as an ethical choice. So we're going to see if we can find the right tempo for these conversations, to go too slowly rather than too quickly, to welcome pauses when they arrive, and also to make sure that the flow of the conversation feels that it's inclusive for everybody who wishes to participate. So one of the skills that is foregrounded in many dance practices is developing the dancer's sense of interoception, so the ability to be able to listen attentively to internal bodily states. And so we know that dance making affords us a very particular way of being in the world. It's a very distinctive form of worldly engagement. And so today we would like to acknowledge that your personal experiences, feelings and emotions, they're all valid forms of knowledge. And we propose that these conversations might be a way we can explore how reason and expertise can actually be in concert with experience and feelings. And perhaps that's where we might make some really good progress, if we're able to turn some internal sensations into curious questions. So what else might we anticipate about these events? Well, certainly some of the ideas we hope to explore might resist easy categorization, because the kind of roots of some of these ideas are really deeply embedded in a very complex web of history, culture, politics and economics. And so we wonder whether these conversations might feel a bit half-formed and slippery and hard to grasp. And for this reason, we've been quite purposeful. We try to resist predicting or determining in advance what might emerge over the next 2 days as we attempt to map the Pluriverse. Finally, for me, we really encourage you to see the value, your implicit value in your own unique position within today's event. It's really valuable, and we'd like to acknowledge that as such. So I'm going to hand over to Daniela.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello again, everybody. So today's launch and the network that it opens are for and with dance people, researchers, artists, producers, educators, students. We celebrate the wealth of knowledges, ideas, and passions that players of this field nurture, share, delight in, work with, and fight for. But we also want to acknowledge the different positionalities that are represented in the field, and have spent some time already as the core research group reflecting on our own positionalities, and especially on our own blind spots. So attending to and celebrating the field and its people also means engaging with care, with its different voices and trajectories, asking questions, listening, traveling through areas that we, as the researchers, may not be particularly familiar with, asking more questions, posing to get to know a new place better, to take in its energy, its roots, and its driving forces. We feel strongly that in order to do that, we need to move both within the field and outside of it to try and gain new vantage points. So this is why we've reached out to wonderful, inspiring colleagues outside the dance field, and I've invited them to join our conversation today and tomorrow, as their perspectives will help us draw a richer and better informed, and also perhaps more wildly imaginative map of the dance pluriverse, of its present and its future. We've asked socio-environmental researcher and activist Katia Valenzuela Fuentes, environmentalist and post-development expert Ashish Kotari, and philosopher, writer, activist and psychologist Bayo Akomolafe to offer their own views on what being in and operating in a pluriverse may look and feel like. And we will hear from Katia today and from Ashish and Bayo tomorrow. We want to learn from them how activist groups operate and how this may help us understand how, as a field, we might organize and shape our community differently. We want to hear about the pluriverse and how we might harness dissenting voices to envision alternative dance worlds. We want to understand how we might respond to crisis differently and learn to stay with what emerges so that we can imagine an otherwise for dance in its present and in its future. So while we are, of course, curating these conversations, we want very much to listen to the voices and the dialogues that will emerge. And we are committed to letting these dialogues rub against our own preconceptions, push us outside our comfort zones, and help us learn how we may see and do things differently. We are committed to engaging with a process that ultimately we hope will lead to imagining a better in the sense of more just, more equitable, more accessible, more sustainable dance pluriverse. So how do we want to relate? How are we proposing to relate? We thought hard about how we would like contributors and attendees to relate to the material brought into the conversation and with each other. And we've all been exposed to and also been actively involved in different ways of curating dialogues and conversations that emphasize inclusive approaches to presenting frameworks for safe spaces, brave spaces, accountable spaces. We feel we've learned a lot from all of the approaches we've encountered and adopted over the years, and are aware that what feels right, safe, brave, inclusive, or engaging will be different for different people. So we invite you to join us holding the values that many of these models have in common, which help us build more equitable spaces. We ask you to step into this space today and tomorrow with an open mind, with a respectful heart, and also with a willingness to listen with care. We suggest that you may want to allow some space for your own and other people's vulnerability, if you can bear it, and that you do what you need to do in order to feel that you can meaningfully participate and share this time with us. To the presenters, who are already here with us today, we won't prescribe how you should introduce yourself, but we do invite you to offer a brief self-description that points to something that is meaningful to you. This doesn't need to necessarily be a visual description. It could equally be about what your body is experiencing, what is alive and present in your awareness right now. Just a couple of words to invite us in a little closer, if you wish. Speakers will be spotlighted during their presentations and the Q&A, and at the end of presentations, there will be time for questions. Each panel will be facilitated by a member of the research team, so either myself, Vicky, or Michelle. For speakers, if you're sharing visuals during your presentation and there is any scrolling, please could you do the scrolling slowly so that everybody can take it in. We feel that keeping time is important. Keeping to time is important so that there is space for everybody's contribution and for dialogue. So we will remind speakers that your time is nearly up, and from that point, you will have about 1 minute to wrap up. We ask you to address each other with respect and keep jargon to a minimum, considering that not all of us attending today are from the same place in this really wide field, or perhaps are from neighboring fields. For attendees, please keep your microphones muted during presentations. We encourage you to use the chat for questions, both during and after the presentations, and we will manage these during the Q&A sessions. You can also raise a hand if you prefer, and we'll do our best to keep track of all reactions. I can see we've got 88 people in this Zoom meeting, so we will do our best. We have also created a Padlet to collect thoughts, observations, and resources that are connected to our conversation, and you can find it in a link that we will shortly put in the chat. It's already been put in the chat earlier, but if you just joined, you may have missed it. So we will repeat what we've already placed in the chat along the course of this afternoon. So the Padlet is intended as a resource that can continue the conversation, and it will remain available beyond this event. You can use Padlet even if you don't have a Padlet account. In this case, it means that your contribution will show up as anonymous. So if you want to add your name and you're appearing as anonymous, please do so. But otherwise, we are happy to have anonymous comments too. The Padlet also includes a questionnaire, which was feedback that we would be very grateful to receive from you at the end of today, at the end of tomorrow, whenever you feel you have a couple of minutes to complete it. This is essential for us to support the work and the research moving forward. It is linked in the Padlet, but we will also circulate it in the chat separately as a separate feedback form link. I think this is all for housekeeping, but please, colleagues, give me a sign if I've forgotten anything. Deep breath. We've got.
That was very thorough, Daniela, very thorough.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we've covered everything. And yeah, I'm very excited about the Padlet. It's not new territory. I have used one before, but it's not been our Padlet before. So please do share things on there. You know, they're a great resource, and then the link to the Padlet will remain for some time after, and then it will also go to our website as well. So yeah, feel free to share. So we're going to move on to our first keynote speaker, which is very exciting. So I'm going to just do a few technical shenanigans, and should I unspotlight you guys and then re-spotlight you? Let's do that. Let's just do that. Okay, bear with.
I can do that, Vicky, while you.
Okay, you're going to okay, and then I'm going to add spotlight for Katia, who should be there. There she is. It's marvelous. Okay, great. Someone's just coming in. I'm just going to let them in, and then I will introduce you, Katia. So, Katia, are you okay? Are you comfortable? I think I just need you to unmute. Yeah, that's great. So I'll just introduce you, and then if you have something that you want to share, slides, then you just share your screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Okay, well, I'll just introduce you first, though. Here we go. So Katia Valenzuela Fuentes, we're delighted that Katia is able to be with us today from Chile. She's assistant professor at the Department of Sociology in the Universidad de Concepción in Chile, and researcher at the Center for Sustainable Urban Development, CEDUS, in Chile. She completed a PhD in politics at the University of Nottingham in the UK. As an activist researcher, her work has focused on Latin American social movements, political ecology, prefigurative politics, and participatory action research. She's currently studying the politics from below that emerged during the Chilean October's uprising, and is interested in how this process became a seedbed for diverse, autonomous, and horizontal movements across Chile. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I've found very interesting how to present ourselves. So I'm gonna say I'm Katia. Have brown hair, brown eyes. I'm a mestiza, a Latina, an activist, a researcher. I'm in the corner of my flat right now in Concepción, which is a city in central southern Chile. And next to me, it's my little dog, Candy, who is sleeping. So that's where I am right now. A little bit nervous because I didn't know that there was going to be so many people right here, like almost 90. And I haven't spoken in English for a while because, of course, I'm living here in my country. So please bear with me if I have I forget some words while I'm presenting. Okay, so it's also, at the beginning, I didn't quite understand why I was getting invited to this kind of dancing network, because I'm coming from social sciences background, from sociology, politics, but slowly I had to read many times kind of the website and Daniela's emails to noticing what was the what should I contribute? What can I contribute to this conversation and to the opening of this this amazing project? And I decided to focus, of course, Daniela helped me out with that as well, the emails we exchanged during the past months, because this is something that has been planned for a while, not like from yesterday or last month. Decided to focus my conversation on what can, I mean, in a very humble way, how can the ways activism, autonomous activism, I'm going to explain that a little bit later on, can provide some perhaps examples of organizing from an activist perspective, but the way autonomous activists organize in Chile, I mean, it's a very situated conversation, can provide some ideas, can nurture some ideas to this network that is starting to be created now across, overseas in a completely different territory, but I'm sure there are going to be some commonalities in between. So I'm going to share some slides, and I hope you can let me know if you can see them correctly.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
I think here is it. Can you see it properly?
Yes, that's great.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I'm gonna try to do today in half an hour is sharing with you I think my own personal experience, because I situate myself, I describe myself, I identify myself as an activist researcher, which means that I'm in the middle of this sometimes uncomfortable boundary between academia, because I work in a university here in Chile, and activism and social movements. And particularly, I've been doing my research and I've been engaging politically in a specific type of activism, which is an activism that I've been calling autonomous activism. Not only me, but also some compañeras, compañeros from Chile as well. We kind of define ourselves as autonomous, and I'm going to explain a little bit what that means. So I can't talk from, I mean, the very meaning of a pluriverse that was Vicky, I think, was explaining. It's about denying universal ideas or universal principles. And of course, in that way, I have to talk about my experience from a very kind of situated position and from Chile in this case. This is where I've been based in the last at least 5 years. I mean, this is where I was born. So, and this is where I've been committed to social transformation. So what I like to say is that the experiences that I'm going to share, the examples, the ideas I'm going to share in these presentations are based, or they draw on, well, some research grants, because you always need this support, financial support to do research. Recent research grants, which have been focused on grassroots organizing after the October uprising in Chile. I don't know if you remember, or if you saw the news in 2019, there was this big uprising in Chile. Along with that, I've been researching, I've been doing participatory action research, activist research, type of activist research with grassroots organizations in vulnerable neighborhoods in the outskirts of the city where I live, in Concepcion. And a little bit in the past, 3 years ago approximately, I did some research, very deep research with environmental activists, so social environmental activists, that's what they call themselves. And all of this research has tried, in all of these research projects, I've tried to conduct what I've called collaborative research, which means it's activist research, basically, where I'm not trying to get this neutral picture of social movements. But I've tried to research from within movements and communities, and not for an instrumental purpose, but because I want to contribute also to the movements themselves, and because I feel part of the movements. In a way, I combine political praxis with knowledge production. What does this mean? That I'm not productive enough for neoliberal academia. So I have to say that, because I spent a lot of time in activism. And well, that's one of, well, but it's not the focus of this conversation, but I have to say it anyway. And it has the challenge of being at the borders of academia and activism, this kind of approach. And at the same time, and I think very connected to this idea of embracing the idea of pluriverse, I've been trying from a decolonial perspective standpoint to acknowledge feelings, my emotions into my research processes. So I'm following some kind of very important activists and authors from the 60s, from the 70s, in particular Orlando Falsborda, which is a Colombian, which was a Colombian sociologist. The idea from this perspective is to unite feeling and thinking in this knowledge production process. And at the same time, and this I learned this from all my environmental friends, the acknowledgement of the interdependence and coexistence of human and non-human nature, so the interdependence between whole forms of life, which is also something that we, in a way, we acknowledge and we've learned from our indigenous peoples, because I also have to acknowledge my own roots, which also I'm part of Mapuche. So in a way, Mapuche cosmology acknowledge the coexistence and the importance of nature, that we are nature, but we also have to look after and have try to find an harmonic relationship with other forms of life, which are not human. So that's in a way, it's like the distance to this anthropocentric view of life is a different ontology in a way. And in the case of Chile, where I'm sitting now, and the territory where I'm living now, in 2019, there was this collective screaming in the streets saying Chile woke up, Chile despertó in Spanish. And people were, hundreds, thousands of people joined in with this idea that Chile finally woke up after so many, after decades of dictatorship in the 70s, 80s, and then restricted democracy. And then there was this scream of it's enough. But I don't know, again, if from your country or your countries, you heard some news about Chile, maybe in the international sections of newspapers, but we've been going through a lot in the past years after the uprising in 2019. There was this constitutional process that with very kind of members, very progressive members trying to write this new draft, which was definitely more progressive than the ones we have now, which is the constitution made during the dictatorship in Chile. That process failed. Then we have a new process written by far-right delegates. That process also failed. We basically, after 2019, we have the same constitution. We have a lot of far-right wing politicians, and we have a supposedly left-wing president, but committed to the same extractivist agenda than the previous governments. So a colleague, I was preparing the presentation a couple of days ago, and a colleague went into my office, and I was in this slide, preparing this slide, and I showed him, look, Chile woke up, and I wonder, he went back to sleep right now, and he said, well, Chile woke up, and now we are in a nightmare. That's what you should put in your slide. And I laughed at the moment, but then I disagreed with him, because the purpose of this conversation is to say, okay, so for many left-wing, for many activists, for many people who've been committed to social change, right now Chile went back to sleep, and movements and organizations decreased. I mean, it's definitely we were in this wave of politics, of social movements and of grassroots organizations, and now we are in this point where there is not much, supposedly, there is not much going on. So we could say, well, we are in a nightmare. Oh, Chile went back to sleep. But what I'm interested to discuss with you right now is that this, I could say, more massive politics, massive social movements, and thousands of people in the streets, that's not happening right now in Chile. But the politics from below, which is a specific type of organization, I will claim that is very much alive in Chile and everywhere. And this is something that we can all connect. So in the case of Chile, there is this long-standing tradition of social movements and grassroots organizations that comes far, I mean, in the past, we will say, I mean, I'm not gonna talk history about now, but even since the 20s, we could say that we have this tradition of movements, communities trying to organize differently, trying to organize beyond political parties, beyond hierarchies, beyond this traditional vanguard, left vanguard, trying to find different ways to relate to each other and to find collective ways to enact change, social change. And a feature of these types of politics is the intention to take this idea of horizontality into practice, take this idea of assembly. I don't know if you remember all these movements, of course you do, Occupy movement also in Spain, in the UK. It was kind of a worldwide international movement. And some of these ideas were there, very much inspired by Zapatistas. I think Vicky also mentioned it. And then this idea of politics from below is tied to this. So when we talk about politics from below and saying that this politics from below is very much alive in Chile, but also everywhere, we're talking about processes, collective processes, where communities, organizations, movements, networks try to self-regulate and trying to practice self-determination, trying to produce their own agendas. And this is done, is built from local spaces of resistance and creation, because we're not only resisting, we're also creating projects that are not necessarily focused on national change, are not necessarily focused on winning over government, are focused very much on changing what is in my area of action. So we're talking about local change and changing things here and now, which is what prefigurative politics means. So we are not seeking a change to happen in the future. We're seeking change now, and how we can connect, live differently, live in harmony with all forms of life, how we can relate to each other differently, and so on. I think there is a mic open. Okay, so I decided, as I told you before, I'm going to share with you some features of how activists in Chile, in my case, I've been working with people from southern Chile, Concepción, also Santiago, the capital, how these groups organize ranging from local assemblies, which is a particular form of organization emerged after the uprising in Chile, which you see like a lot of people gathering in their own neighborhoods and engaging in radical politics. Socio-environmental activist networks, which is activist networks, very powerful in Chile because of all of the extractivist projects that are threatening our communities, and also autonomous collectives and co-ops, which are also, I would say, small networks of people gathering around a variety of issues such as food co-ops, media collectives, alternative media projects, feminist organizations, and so on. But they all kind of gather together around the umbrella of autonomy. And so then what is autonomy? How if we want to have a focus, like a zoom on this, the practices and the organizational strategies of these movements. Autonomy from the perspective of movements, of activists, and in a way what I've been kind of collecting through these years of research, is understood as refusal, and both as refusal and creation. Refusal because these networks, activist networks, they strongly reject modes of domination, what they defined as modes, systems of domination. They strongly reject the state, for example. So that's one key feature of these movements. They don't want to engage with trying to achieve social change through the state, through political parties, through in a way, the means of the state, the means that the state can use. They want to seek change through a different path. So because they refuse and they reject the very idea of the state. There is a rejection of patriarchy as well, because it's, I don't know, I imagine this is also something that we can see in many places. Feminisms with S in plural has played an important role also in kind of shifting the principles of movements. Movements are not necessarily only women integrated, but they are like mixed groups which have been in a way forced by feminist ideas to change and to adjust to these new ethical frameworks. Refusal of colonial structures, refusal of in our case, of this in a way dismissive view of indigenous peoples and of indigenous cosmologies, refusal of all these colonial, in a way, structures that are embedded in our subjectivities, in a way, and refusal of capitalism, of course. So in a way, these groups, most of them define themselves as anti-capitalists. But politics cannot be possible if it's only about refusal. It's only about rejecting. It's only about resistance. It's also about creation. So what is the alternative then? If we're not trying to pursue it or to follow this traditional path to politics, the path of trade unions, the path of political parties, the path of winning and getting a position in city council, in the government, central government, and so on. So the perspective, the views that the plurivals, in a way, what the language that the network is embracing, it's about then autonomy is to build with our own capacities, with our own resources, with the energy that we have in the communities, something different. We're not waiting for some big change to happen. We change what we have here and now. So, and for that, then we have to create and we have to make possible a different way of organizing. And that's when horizontality plays an important role here. So I will say that horizontality it becomes the fuel and it becomes the backbone of autonomy. Because when we talk about autonomy, it can sound very, I don't know, attractive in terms of speech, you know, like an interesting political claim. However, how we make this possible? Then the idea of horizontal structures, horizontality, plays up a key role. Why? Because horizontality, this idea, it's both a horizon, and a praxis. So it's something that we aspire, something that we desire to achieve, to fully achieve, but it's never fully achieved. That's something very important to say. So we walk towards horizontality, but also we enact horizontality. So it's also praxis. It's not only a political statement. It's a ethical framework which is flexible, because it's not like something, we're not here building a dogmatic perspective where it's nothing can be changed. So it's a horizontality in a way is how these groups try to enact the anti-authoritarian principles and anti-hierarchical principles. And for that, they put into place a lot of principles, organizational structures, and strategies, concrete strategies. Then I asked the question, how to make horizontality possible? Is it really possible? Because this is a question that comes from very different kind of academic backgrounds, but also practice backgrounds, politics backgrounds. So in a way, claiming that this idea of horizontality is romantic, it's more like an utopia than a real possibility, because at the end, you need a structure, you need hierarchies, you need clear roles, and at the end, some key leaders that end up doing the work. You know, that's some of the claims that I've usually hear when I'm presenting and when we're discussing these things. And here we are not claiming that we don't have structures. So activists, communities, networks, it's not that there is no structures in place. There are, but they have some specific features. For example, first of all, the structures, these groups, they create non-hierarchical, flexible structures for participation. What does this mean? Firstly, the participation is non-mandatory. So you can't have like, it's completely working on a voluntary base. So people who engage in these movements, in these networks, they know that they can join and that they can participate as they can and as they want. So some people have are carers, some of them are parents, some of them have to work full-time, have full-time work, so others are students, or so some of them are unemployed. So every person participating in an activist network, such as the ones I mentioned, I've been working with, they have a diverse, they have different living conditions, different lives at the end. And that means that you can't expect that everyone participate in the same way. So these groups, they've been trying different ways to enable to be open to different people and to be open for many people to feel comfortable participating. And for example, some of them divide between full members of our organization, and here we say simpatizantes, would be something like sympathizers or something like that, which is like some people who are not fully involved in the organizations, but they participate in some activities, in the activities that they can fully commit. And for that, it comes with this, the idea that the most of these organizations, they strongly believe in the rotation of roles, tasks, and responsibilities. This is a strong also political view, because it's based on the idea that specialization, it hinders horizontality. If you become the expert in finances in a group, or become the expert in project making, I don't know, or in communications, then you become, you can't be replaced. And this idea, the idea of rotation, means that the purpose is not seeking professionalization to become professionals of the a specific area of the organization, but it's to learn together and to collectively share what needs to be done in an organization. So rotation means that even if you are less effective in the short term, because in a way you say, well, but to get I don't know, to get the finances working in an organization, you need to learn about it a lot. And then you can be there in that role for 3 years. The idea of this movement says, okay, we understand that it can be less efficient, but that we need some other people to learn about finances as well. Because also, this is also important, there is a strong idea as well about rejecting this division, very Cartesian division between thinking and doing. So also very common in many movements, where there are the intellectuals, the thinkers, the ones who write, the ones who think, the ones who speak, and the ones who do, who perform, those who go to the practical things, to finding the space for the meeting, to take notes, to do all the I don't know, communications task, and so on. And that's also it's something that is challenged by these movements, but these activists. So in a way, it's okay, we have to be both, we have to be prepared for taking on of all of these roles. And some people say, well, but I'm better in this. Please don't force me to do this. And then, of course, it's not like also a dictatorship will say, okay, if you don't feel comfortable speaking in public, it doesn't matter, you have to go anyway. It's also about, of course, sharing, but learning as well, and telling the person that at the moment that they feel ready, they can go and try this responsibility. And similarly, the rotation goes as well to the spokespersons, delegates. I don't know how can we call it, if you understand that. So the people who go public and in speaking up for the groups. And in a way, as how horizontality, this idea, this political perspective is put into practice, it seeks to break down with this idea of the key leader who speaks all the time and who is the one well known and is the one who keeps the contacts and who is contacted by others and who goes to the press. So in a way, here the main idea is that the spokespersons are the voice of the group. They don't make decisions on their own, and also they need to be changed constantly, because they don't want one person to become like the face of the organization, because the organization is a space, collective space, integrated by many people. In a way, also protects the people participating in there. And similarly, consensus decision-making is something very, very important in these activist networks, meaning that if you have to be 2 full days deciding one single thing, then you spend two full days deciding that thing. So this is one of the tricky ones, because of course we are we're used to the idea of voting. So we have to vote, and so we make a decision quickly. But what happened if 20 people voted and 9 people voted against? What happened with those 9 people? So in a way, this idea of consensus decision-making challenge the representative democracy in a way, liberal democracy, and kind of encourage this idea of direct democracy, where people need to hear themselves. And it's very interesting how consensus decision-making sometimes, not sometimes, many times, make people change their views. Because when you are willing to listen and to fully listen and to listen for a period of time, like a long period of time, then you can relate to others and you can understand what others are saying. The idea of consensus decision-making can be raw, or you can trace it back to anarchist tradition, but also here I'm in Concepcion, which is in southern Chile. I'm in the Mapuche territory in a way. So Mapuche communities, they gather in Trabun is the name in Mapuche. They gather for days to discuss, and they only listen to each other for days. So in a way, it's also the tradition of assembly. In a way, it's a tradition that can be traced among different, in a way, political perspectives, but it's also part of our indigenous peoples in Abulhawa in Latin America. Then assembly, which is this place where they all gather together in the circle, can be seen as the heart of collective practice. It's so important, the idea of gathering around an assembly, because this is the moment where all people have a voice, can speak up, can all be part of the decision making. So it's the place where we gather together and exchange ideas, proposals, projects, and so on. It's the place where we meet, and where, of course, there are many rules in a way in place. Rules regarding how much we can expand in terms of time. So how long we can expand on some ideas. So in a way, kind of not allowing a couple of people to take over the entire conversation. Respect for, in a way, you can see in an assembly, you can see patriarchal dynamics where male participants speak more than women, and what there is. So in a way, you can set up rules to organize the assembly in a way that everyone can feel integrated and everyone can feel safe. And at the same time, and let me know how I'm with time, how I'm doing with time, Daniela.
I think you have maybe like 5 minutes left before
Okay.
we have some questions. Yeah.
And then there's another important feature for enacting, putting into practice horizontality will be the exchange of information, knowledge, and experiences. So acknowledging that every participant has valuable knowledge, valuable experiences to share with the group, and information as well. So in a way, the assembly, in a way, is the place where this exchange takes place. The idea is not to have people who are who have all, in a way, the information, access to information, and to restrict information to the other members. On the same with knowledge, for example, it's very common in these groups to run these self-training workshops, for example, about different things, about, I don't know, in the case of environmental activists, about extractivism, or about agroecology, I don't know. So they run these self-trainings where they all together learn about something, or sometimes they invite someone who knows more and they learn with them. And so they don't, they are not delegating the knowledge, a knowledge holder. So someone is the knowledge holder, and we don't care. We just do the things that need to be done, the practical stuff. So in a way, this is a challenge to that idea. Again, the division between thinking and doing. But horizontality doesn't come alone. This idea of, I say that it's the fuel of autonomy, and it's the backbone of autonomy, because it provides the structure, this flexible structure, but it's a structure anyway. it comes with other practices that in a way they all kind of support each other. And in this case, for example, horizontality, these autonomous activists, they've been working a lot on this idea of affective politics, of care, the politics of care, where it's about finding a space that is, it's a space of friendship, it's a space of love, it's a space of respect, it's a space of looking after others, and not only doing this tough politics, you know, not only about, okay, we need to, well, actually, there is tough politics in a way here, so especially here where I live, there have been so many big projects, mining projects, forestry, industry, projects of death, where communities are battling against them. And it's very tough in a way. You have to fight the police, you have to have threats, deal with threats from the corporations. But at the same time, there is a space for caring, for love, for affection. That's something that's became in a way salvavidas, we say, life boat, I don't remember, but something like that is the way to keep people alive in a way. And with that comes popular education, which is, I'm sure you also are familiar with it, this tradition that created in here in Latin America in the 60s, in the 70s by Paulo Freire, popular educator, Pablo Freire. And in a way, it's an invitation to challenge the hierarchies embedded in formal education and how we learn. And it changed completely our ways of learning and our ways to producing knowledge, because it's an invitation to apply horizontality also in all of these processes of learning and of producing knowledge. Autogestión is the word, I always put it in Spanish because I don't think there is a good translation in English, but in English it would look like self-management. That will be kind of the rough translation of autogestión, which in a way means to provide, trying to seek funding resources for ourselves. So we are not seeking to get big grants and get things subsidized by the state or by a big corporation. So we try to find the resources we need with the means we have. So that's it's a way to protect autonomy of the groups from all these big antagonists, the state, the corporations, the private sector, and so on, politicians. And finally, alliance building, which is, in a way, it's a very important also dimension of the practice of these movements, where these movements acknowledge the importance of networks, talking about networks, you know. But it's interesting the approach that they have. In a way, they claim that it's important to build networks that don't seek to take over the particular politics that they run, and networks that it's in a way a humble approach to networking, where they can contribute to a network, but then at the same time are very cautious that the network's not gonna consume them in a way. It's not gonna take over all of their individual and kind of collective practices at the small level, which is something that in the experience of Chile has happened a lot. And or where there are like political parties involved, and like with these broader national networks, and where there are like agendas, hidden agendas that end up in a way trying to push for some areas, and that goes against the politics of these movements. But this not only about this is all amazing, this is all so great, you know, there is a lot of challenges of autonomous politics. These are a few that I mentioned, and I'm not going to expand on them much because I don't have the time. Just to say briefly, when it comes to organize differently, a lot of interpersonal tensions arise, because this type of politics invite us to live differently and to relate differently with others. So that is, it's clearly an invitation to tensions among people. Yeah. As self-managed actions pretend to prevent, in a way, to protect autonomy, this also means that the scope of these actions can be narrow, because there is always the issue of financial precariousness, and not only in the groups, but also within the members of the groups. People who are involved in activism usually struggle with money. And that's something that, in a way, trigger the levels of participation in a way, because if you are struggling financially, and then you don't have enough time to participate. At the same time, other kind of challenges that have been found in these groups is that formal education, we are so, in a way, it's so embedded in our subjectivities, the way we've been taught in a way in formal education, that it's very difficult to unlearn these vertical logics where we are used to. And at the same time, when talking about leadership, we're not saying that there are no leadership in these movements. Of course there are, but the challenge is how to not to that leader doesn't remain in a rigid place, in a rigid role, that they rotate. So that's the purpose of rotation. But there is anyway the situation that there are tacit forms of leadership, of strong leaderships, where this purpose of rotating and of horizontality get, in a way, stuck by these people, in a way. And when talking about broader networks, usually these activist groups, they refrain from participating because they are scared of these hidden agendas, but also they easily withdraw because they find that there is no much affinity, for example, political affinity or affinity in terms of the organization, because usually to make broader networks work, it's needed to have some, or at least that's the way it's been done. You need like this strong structures or key people organizing, and that's something that in a way it crashes with this perspective of horizontality.
Katia, I have to crash in, I'm afraid, due to time.
That's it pretty much. The uneven levels of participation, I mentioned it, and also asymmetries in political experience. And just that was the conclusion, just claiming that autonomous politics, it's neither a political statement nor a romantic utopia. What I've shared with you is like the kind of just small summary of what people actually do here in Chile in the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years. So it's a type of activism that it's been happening, and in many places persist after even the pricing in Chile, but it's also very important to stress that these challenges and contradictions need to be addressed with collective and radical imagination, because they are there. This is not like how this is so amazing, and there are not problems in there. There are problems that are constantly trying to being addressed, and we're constantly trying to learn from them. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I talk a lot. Sorry.
Thank you, Katia. If you could stop sharing your screen, I think we have time for one question that did come in from VIP. So let me just try and
We have a couple of questions. Let's see what we manage, Vicky.
Yeah. So Vip asks, what kind of hierarchical tensions or challenges do Chilean local non-hierarchical organizational structures have to face? How do they address these challenges? For example, individuals still have to engage with government systems like ID cards and education systems, medical care, voting in a national government, and benefit payments. So it's that tension between doing this kind of work and then also being within these structures themselves, I think.
Yeah, well, there is this friend, Anna Dinerstein. She's a scholar from Bath, actually, University. She always talks about the impossibilities of autonomy, and she says like in brackets, and then possibilities of autonomy, because we're always in within capitalism, within a state system. We are not an island. We're not outsiders. We are.
Can we ask attendees to mute themselves, please? I'll double check.
Yeah. So, for example, well, about voting, that's an issue, because some within the groups, some people decide that they don't vote, even if it's mandatory now in Chile. So they kind of face the sanctions, the state sanctions, but they decide not to vote because it goes against their principles. But some other people vote. So in a way, that's a decision. Okay, we are gathering around defending our territory. That's our purpose. We are gathering because we want to stop this corporation to keep sacrificing our communities. So the purpose here is not to discuss whether we go and vote or no. So then, in a way, there are these conversations in place in groups, but there is this place for freedom as well. And of course, there is also people seeking benefits from the states as well, but I have to say that here in Chile, we don't have many benefits. It's not the system. It's not like we don't have a welfare system at all. So in a way, it's a lot of kind of very neoliberal society. But some other people go and take on more radical stance and say, okay, we're gonna self-manage our lives. So there is this move, I think an increasing movement, creating cooperatives and trying to autonomous cooperatives, seeking to provide subsistence in an autonomous way, in a way. So of course you encounter the state, and that's a thing that it happens all the time. And the state, it's always the issue of contradictions and of arguments, and of it divides. For example, when we had the uprising in Chile in 2019, the assemblies, these local assemblies, we had this amazing movement of thousands of assemblies across the country in the neighborhoods. And then the constitutional process came, and some assemblies decided to stay away from the constitutional process and decide to stay working in the neighborhoods. And the half of the assemblies decided to go through in a way, institutional state path, and they stopped doing work in the neighborhood, stopped doing grassroots work, because they were consumed by the work of the institutional work. So there is this clear division between paths being followed. And that's something that's not solved, it's not resolved. And in terms of hierarchies, I've seen different groups, because I've been studying different groups, and they dealt with this issue of hierarchy differently within the organizations. But for example, rotation is something very important. In some groups, there is this very open space in the assembly for discussing when people feel uncomfortable with someone. It's taking on too many responsibilities, or it's becoming very much in a way in the spotlight of the group. So that those conversations they have these conversations in the group, and then they decide that these people, they have to, in a way, take a step back a little bit so others can take on that role, and they can go with this flow of seeking horizontality. That's what I was saying, that horizontality is a horizon. So there are many practices in place, but it's also something that you seek to achieve, but not achieve fully in a way.
Thank you so much, Katia. I'm so sorry to have to cut this conversation short. It feels like we've just started this really rich conversation. And I know there's a really excellent question from Neil in the chat as well. But Neil, I apologize, we don't have time to delve into that. But if you could add it in the Padlet or email it later, maybe have a further correspondence, that would be really great. We do need to have a break now between now and the next panel to give people time to refresh. But Katia, I just want to say a big, big thank you for such a wonderful presentation that really has got this network off to a great start. It was just amazing. And I'm so struck by how many parallels there are in your language and the choreographic and movement language that we're talking about, mobilizing, moving, horizontality, and moving from below. So I don't know if we can do a Zoom clap or a Zoom cheer or something for you, but thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.
I hope it helps. I mean, it comes from such a different place, but I really hope it helps and it provides some ideas to discuss, and such an amazing and inspiring networks you're creating. So happy to help and to, I don't know, contribute to whatever I can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Katia,
Thank
from
you.
all of us. And if you have time to stay for the rest of the conversation, we know that you're joining from a different time zone.
Yeah.
So.
I'll be listening because I have to have lunch and then I have to go take Candy for a little walk and my dog. But I've been listening. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great. So thank you, everybody. We're going to pause the recording now, I think, if we could do that. And
here we go. Okay. So here we are. Can everyone see that? Okay, it's just loading.
Yes.
Lovely. So it's great to be here. I'm Alexandrina Hemsley. I am a light-skinned person of color with mixed heritage. I have short curly black hair and my pronouns are she, they. I've got a cream scarf on because it's cold. So yeah, this first image is from a collage I recently did, and I made it really, really quickly and really instinctively. And it's been really nice recently to dive into instinct as a kind of opening a tap on, or like into slower knowledges that take time to accumulate, information I've absorbed over time, and images that I've kind of lived with, both the kind of inner living and the kind of outer connecting to kind of creativity or source or something. So I guess a kind of channel. In my practice, I tend to work with multidisciplinary layers of movement and biomythographical texts. So texts that kind of take part of my own autobiography and then create these myths or expanded metaphors, as well as collage then to speak to multiplicity and retrieving myself from sites of harm. For me, dance and film and writing and collage and facilitation, they each hold something in common, a kind of connective tissue, in the form of starting with a body as a container. So yeah, just knowing that the body is always the kind of starting place, and then the form that my practice takes will shift to match the idea. And I guess I always hope that these many layerings can evoke a kind of reclaiming of an internal texture and a kind of re-embodiment after like prolonged exposure to, I don't know, and things that kind of dissociate or marginalize, a kind of inner storm, or also these kind of layers, the way they can speak to a kind of intersectional subjectivity, and become sites of this kind of marbling. And then also that they're complicated. And that I feel like joy and dancing is also complicated within the current status quo, within all the other kind of violent intersections. So I think, yeah, in particular from about 2015 onwards, I would say I really treasured multiplicity as a way of returning to a sense of intimacy. My work, Fountain from 2021, was the kind of latest iteration of the way that watery metaphors and a kind of embodied but non-linear sense of time, and also questioning the gazes that have been encountered by bodies, have been a really key part of my creative and critical writing practice, as well as choreographic practice. Calling on watery metaphors in particular to offer up these dynamic spaces of repair, the way that water can both hold us and overwhelm us, and how similar to fire, it kind of has this fertile creative energy as well as potential for destruction and undoing. I then also realized in preparing this presentation that I think I work with movement schools as these kind of tides and waves that are kind of non-narrative and more cyclical than linear. And a kind of, again, with the water metaphors, like really diving into a level of noticing our bodies and of sensorial inquiries. And so dance always as a way of surfacing these inner worlds. And then I work with improvisation because I think for me, it does give most immediate and fulfilling tapping into the senses. And then I use imagination to guide quite vivid, visually dominant, say, worlds to guide the dancing as well. I thought I would share a poem that I wrote as an example of like layering and of water. It takes the form of a golden shovel, which is where the last word of each line is taken in homage to another poet. So this poem, I've highlighted it in yellow, the original line of the poem, and it's after the poet Nira Wahid. So yeah, I'll just read it if I can move it. So, mouth clenched, I pressed a toe into clear waters. I flinched a little at the ritual's heat. I am pressing past the fire of taking too many tears to bed and seeking a vessel to surrender in, a bath. Trapped in the moment of loss, I let the hot tap run its pain. I am torn at you leaving. Cracks need washing out of my skin so that a poem can rise up in place of the war you conjured and fled from. The steam returns myself to me. Oh, yeah. So then as I'm making movement scores, a kind of similar vibrancy strikes me when I then begin to think of the digital realm and how, yeah, it's another way of making the things I have in my head. So this really started in earnest when I collaborated with Secretary Mutangwange on black holes. And we were doing lots of research into Afrofuturism and speculation. And this work retold the history of the universe with a very dense text and had two figures or characters occupying multiple experiences and scales. So we would go from kind of thinking of ourselves as atoms right the way through to stars and people or nature. So we kind of would, again, like play within these plural existences. And it was the first time I worked with Jack Barraclough, who made images, and I've worked with him since. Yeah, to realize a lot of the digital realm. And I think, again, coming at it from a place of expressing emotionality and again, embodied sensations of like flying apart or something scattering, something reforming itself. And again, a kind of visual commentary on the fragmentation of bodies and of communities that white supremacy wants to enforce by undermining or isolating or compartmentalizing, dehumanizing, or full-on erasing bodies. So yeah, it's kind of a reimagining. And what Daniela was saying around power and hope, I find working in this way, in these kind of dreamscape ways, a hopeful endeavor, to take the scattering I can feel but shift it into a space of potential. And then similarly, my work with Jamila Johnson Small has also like situated itself recently with a kind of digital realm. And in close relationship to history. So this was a commission we did for Somerset House. We were asked to respond to the building's connection to the Royal Navy, which was a massive ask and topic. So yeah, we made a short video, and it had this kind of digitally rising horizon of water.
Alex, heads up
Yes.
that in 10 minutes. So
Okay, lovely. That's great. I can just skip through.
no.
Just more digital landscapes from Fountain. Again, this kind of like unraveling or reimagining bodies in space. And then, yeah, and the kind of crumbling. And then this is the new work called Many Lifetimes, which will be happening this year. It will be kind of solos in the round, hopefully drawing a live and intimate relationship with an audience, and a kind of gentle spectacle somehow. And yeah, that's me. And then I've got a little video link I can just pop in the chat that has some excerpts of Fountain if people want to see that, or I can put it on the Padlet. So yeah, that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and sorry for jumping in.
No,
But hopefully, we can link back to all of this in the conversation. And yes, please, to the links in the chat and in the Padlet. I'm kind of copying and pasting, so I'm happy for you to put them wherever it's easiest.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Alex. I know there is a question already from Vicky in the chat. Vicky, would you like me to read it out now, or should we keep them for the end?
I think keep the questions for the end, because there might be synergies across.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Alexandrina. And we're going to move on to Rosie's presentation before we have Dani and we come back with the conversation. Rosie, over to you. I don't know whether you have anything to share.
Yes, I do. So I'm just going to try to do that. Hopefully. Can you see that now?
Yes. Perfect.
Great. So hello everybody. My name is Rosie Heafford, and I am the co-director of Secondhand Dance. I'm just going to say that my daughter is running around, rampaging downstairs. So apologies if there are any screams in the background or we get a little visitor at some point. I am a white disabled woman with dark brown hair that is currently in a plait, and I'm sitting in my office with a leaf print wallpaper behind me. My pronouns are she, her, and I work with chronic pain and fatigue, and I'm also a parent carer to a child with quite complex needs. Secondhand Dance is based in England, and we've been creating dance performances and digital films since 2017. Oh, there's no picture on that page. Well, I'll skip through to the next one. It's a bit more interesting, hopefully. So we create bold, accessible and sensory dance experiences for children and adults. And we believe that every person from birth deserves great art that includes and expands their experiences. Our work is often socially engaged and subtly participatory, or more participatory as the current one is. And we've done shows in theatres, galleries, libraries, schools, hospitals, and even a repurposed cowshed, which was quite the career highlight. Our vision is for a world where dance, play and exploratory movement are central to the lives of children and adults. Over the last 5 years, my practice and the company's vision have been shaped by kind of personal experiences that have interwoven with the company's experimentation with access tools for audiences. And that's quite particular for us because we're often making shows that are for children aged under 5. So they're Their language tools and experiences of the world are really developing. So in terms of things like audio description or BSL, or how we create access for neurodivergent audiences, that's all kind of quite new ground, particularly for dance. We're also an adaptive company, or we're calling ourselves an adaptive company, because we are co-led by a disabled and a non-disabled leader. And adaptive means that we're constantly in the process of being responsive and learning from the needs of the people that we work with, and are trying to uphold a bespoke and personal approach to access. So we use the social model of disability to inform our practice and reflection process. So just for anyone that's not familiar with that, the social model of disability proposes that a person isn't disabled because of their impairment or health condition, but because of the physical and attitudinal barriers in society. I'm actually in the middle of creating a new show that will premiere in 2 weeks' time. So rather than kind of think about previous projects, I thought I'd talk about something that I'm kind of right in the middle of. So I might actually be less clear, but hopefully that's an interesting place to be. So the current show that we are making is called The Sticky Dance. And I'm making it in collaboration with Takeshi Matsumoto. I've worked with a rehearsal director due to my own disability for a number of years, but this is the first time that we've brought in a much more of a collaborator, so that Takeshi and I are making the work together, so that around everything else, when we can navigate the access needs that I have, and also the kind of personal and family circumstances that are going on. So the Sticky Dance has 2 versions. It is being made for an early years audience aged 3 to 5, and also for a neurodivergent audience. The 2 versions are not that dissimilar, apart from in terms of length. So with the early years version, we wanted to explore what a more durational version might be, so that we're actually creating a show that's 2 hours and audiences can come and leave with a little bit more flexibility, trying to remove the barriers on parents and families to be somewhere at a particular time ready to engage with 45 minutes and dance and then leave, which particularly for an early years audience doesn't always happen. Similar for a neurodivergent audience, but we felt that actually the comings and goings of an audience might be more difficult. And for that, it's a much lower capacity audience. So the tickets are only for 8 children at a time. With that, to make the space a little bit less busy, a little bit less loud as well. The performance is improvised mostly, and this is the kind of second improvised show that we've made, and I think that's very much for me around making the space for the children to be centered within the performance, for their movement, for their artistic language to kind of come through. And I think one of the comments that feels like it gives me the most joy that we hear from adults who experience the shows with their children is around how an adult has experienced their child differently, whether that's, you know, a nursery staff or a parent or a carer, whoever that is, but that chance to be in a space with a young child and just be different than they might be together in another place. The starting idea for this show was around autonomy, and giving adults and children a choice about how they experience the performance, and wanting to enable different ways of being in the space. So watching, listening, dancing, doing and resting, all as possibilities that were equally valued, as opposed to a model where an audience or a child audience comes and sits and has to watch. think it was to be for the children who need to move to engage, and for the children that need to observe to make meaning, and kind of find the spaces within in between all of that. A little bit about our creation process. So we make in quite a uniquely intense way, in that almost every day that we are in the creation period, we work with children. So every morning we try to be in a nursery or a school setting or somewhere where we can invite children in to improvise with them. So it doesn't feel like it's quite co-creation, but they are absolutely central to the creation of the work that we're making. And we normally work a 3-day working week that accommodates my access needs, but also really allows time for the intensity of the work, because when you're going from mornings with children to afternoons in the rehearsal space, you actually need quite a lot of like reflection time after that. And I've got a couple of little videos. They're very short that I just thought I'd share. So this was back last October when we were in a scout hut. It's just 15 seconds. Just another little one that I thought I would share was this one. And this particular moment is a really nice one that if you were to come and see the show, you'd see, and it came completely from the children. We hadn't had any plans to kind of make balls from tape, but they did it, and it's now stuck with us, and it's kind of part of our dramaturgical structure and language. So the way that we work is mostly non-verbal. It's about constantly observing the responses and the communication given by the children. Key tools that we use to create the work are modelling, mirroring, touch, listening, and kind of also bringing in musical prompts to shift ambience and atmosphere. And we're kind of working with everything all at once. So as we make the show, we're also thinking about how an audience meets the show, the beginnings, the endings. It's all very carefully crafted to try and meet the needs of the children and audiences that we work with. And we also bring in, well, this time it's been kind of multiple advisors that we're calling audience ambassadors, who provide us with critical feedback. And they'll have different lived experiences. So maybe they're neurodivergent themselves, or have expertise in early years practices or something like that. And we're asking them to think again about triggers or sensitivities for the audience, how we can welcome, how we engage the audience, all the way up to kind of the language that we use and how the show is marketed as well.
Just letting you know, Rosie, about time. I'm sure we've reached the 10 minutes, so thank you.
So I was just going to go on to show you just a few images from the design. Last Saturday we met with another test audience, which is where some of these images have come from. And then next week we head into a production week where we try and bring all of that learning together. And actually that's the kind of one unusual week that we have, where it won't be until the end of the week that we actually have children in the space. So we get a little bit of breathing space from children for that week. Yeah, that's where we are.
Thank you, Rosie, and sorry again that you had to rush the end. We'll reconnect with the material through the conversation. Thank you. Can I see whether Dani can come back and be spotlighted? There are already some comments in the chat for Rosie that I'll read out later during the conversation. Dani, there you are. Are you sharing?
Yeah, I'm just going to do that now.
Great.
I'm not sure if this is the same for everybody. Dani's a little bit frozen.
Can you tell me if you can see that screen?
It's kind of flashing in and out. Now I can see a black screen, but sometimes it flashes with the image. Don't know whether it's just me.
I wonder, Dani, if it might help if you don't share your slides in a slideshow, if you share them, you know, in the making thing. I just wonder whether it's a bandwidth thing. Do we still have bandwidth?
That's really clear now.
That's clear? Okay. Okay, I think I'm sharing normally, but anyway. Okay. Hi, so my name is Dani Abulhawa, and I'm based at the School of Performance and Cultural Industries at the University of Leeds. I'm a British Palestinian woman in my 40s. I have light skin and brown hair, which is tied up. And yes, I guess I will say that the context that I'm bringing to this is the current genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, and that is very much at the center of everything for me at the moment. So I will be honest about that. And okay, so I'll start in. I'm the co-editor for Choreographic Practices journal, and in 2021 I wrote an editorial for the journal where I talked about how the world had changed at the intersection between the coronavirus pandemic, a climate emergency, and a renewed vigor for social justice. And I cited research that talks about performance being increasingly redefined through an understanding of the ways that human and non-human matter are inseparably entangled. And I cited the work of Rebecca Jensen and her deep sea dances, which were presented in Melbourne in 2017, in which she writes about the porousness of our existence. At this moment in time, sorry, just change my. At this moment in time, thinking about compassionate relationships across species seems absurd when human beings are incapable of ensuring the protection and safety of each other, or of recognizing the interrelationships of people. I'm referring here to the multiple genocides and military incursions happening across the globe, particularly those that affect people of colour in the global south, many of which are caused or exacerbated by the histories of colonial conquest and political meddling by the UK and other European countries. So in light of these contexts, I wanted to talk about the importance of understanding our embodied colonial roots within a lens of intersectional environmentalism, which is a term coined by American activist Leah Thomas. In 2019, I co-founded Plant Ecology Beyond Land, with my husband, Christian Berger. We'd been reading about seaweed's potential to contribute to a decarbonised society, whilst also supporting coastal communities through the development of a renewed aquaculture sector in Wales. Christian comes from a materials science background, and together we built a hatchery in Anglesey, which is what you can see in this image here. The hatchery supplies kelp seeded line to sea farmers. We also design and build environmental monitoring equipment and use it to assess various parameters in the ocean for sea farming and ensuring the environmental safety of sea farms. But when we started Pebble, we always envisaged it as a company that would integrate communities practice. And that's where my involvement with the company comes in and is focused. And just last year, we were awarded a grant from Welsh Government to run a coastal community leaders project in Holyhead, which is a community on Anglesey, and it's kind of fairly remote because it's quite far to the west, which involves us facilitating and supporting local people to develop their own community projects. Alongside the monitoring hatchery services and community leader work, I also began exploring the intertidal zone around the hatchery at Penmon Point as a site for somatic improvisation. The praxis that underpins this comes from, or initially came from, the field of ecosomatics, which identifies the potential of somatically informed movement to connect dancers to the environment in a way that extends a person's empathy for the more than human. As Robert Bettman argues, there's a need to examine movement practice forms that can widen and increase participation in somatic practice because of its potential to raise a sensibility of deep ecology. And the term deep ecology was coined by Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss to describe a philosophical move away from anthropocentrism toward acknowledging and respecting the interrelationships of humans to non-human species. Somatic practice, as we all know, necessitates that the mover is able to listen in to the feelings and sensations of their body, which in turn promotes the practitioner's care and attention to other aspects of their being. And applying care and attention to ourselves, our environments and the communities that we're part of may also be a way of promoting greater empathy and caretaking for other species. But to go back a step, the listening in of somatic practice on the individual raises embodied histories, which, as Petra Cooper urges, should be attended to within an ecological inquiry. And she writes, in an ecosoma inquiry, my own self is never unmarked or the quiet center of the phenomenological self. I am part of both a human and a non-human ecology, and I am part of a set of historically and culturally grown relations. All of this brings embeddedness and entanglements. Cooper suggests the term ecosoma instead of ecosomatics as a way to recognize the positionality and memory of the body as it comes into contact with ecology. In December 2022, I went to see an exhibition at the gallery in Bangor by artist Audrey West. The exhibition was called Redemption Songs. West had created what she describes as a cathedral of remembrance around the sufferings of transatlantic slavery. The exhibition was very powerful, and one image in particular, which mapped the bodies of people on a slave ship, transported me back to when I learned about this terrible history in middle school and the dehumanizing ways in which this history is taught. And after seeing the exhibition, I began thinking a lot about people's relationships to the sea and how they are so deeply shaped by colonial histories. And this led me to Leah Thomas's concept of intersectional environmentalism, which recognizes how systems of oppression of people are intrinsically linked to environmental harm. And it made me question how the transatlantic slave trade, but just the colonial histories of European countries in general have contributed to the exploitation and destruction of natural resources and the disruption of environmental stewardship by Indigenous communities. So I reflected on this in the context of Wales, of lost cultures and practices, of land ownership and political control, of economic and social inequality as a result of historical English colonization, and how I guess one person or one community might have a very different relationship to the sea than another, and considered the ways in which these embodied contexts impact conceptions of environmental activism, or how someone can bring themselves to that work. So following these ideas, our Coastal Community Leaders Project supports people to engage in somatic awareness, identify the enviro-social projects that are most important to them within their communities, and find their own creative ways of developing new ideas to address them. And though these projects don't necessarily draw on colonial history, participants are invited to consider their own positionality and the relationship between environmental injustice and social injustice through their specific projects. And over the course of 6 workshops, participants are guided to identify and design their own community projects or develop existing ones. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dani. For keeping to time. Thank you so much. I am aware that between swapping from one and the other, we are already 40 minutes into our 1-hour slot. So can I bring back Alex and Rosie so that we can open up the conversation with Dani? I can perhaps start from the questions and the comments that have gone in the chat, unless actually the 3 of you have got some questions.
Daniela.
Yes.
Daniela,
yes.
The first question, Daniela, was from Vicky, actually, who had a question about movement schools.
Will you help me with that, Michelle? Sorry, I'd forgotten about the
assistance. I don't know, Vicky, whether you want to come on mic to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you for those great presentations, and I love the fact that the waves were connecting across and the watery spaces. I guess it's a question for it started from my reflection on Alexandrina's presentation about when you talked about schools coming in waves, but then it kind of led me through the other presentations as well. Just maybe some further reflection on how in your processes and your practices, you kind of accumulate and you had those accretions or accumulations along the way, and how you see that sort of that momentum of a choreographic or a making process or a creative process, how you see that sort of happening and gathering momentum in your own work, if that makes sense. Like who else, what are the forces informing?
Yeah. Great question. I think I'm so moved by the presentations. Where to start? My brain's kind of going everywhere because I'm also thinking about this essay, Black Atlantic, Queer Atlantic, that was describing like the queer relationships that would happen on slave ships, and how, I don't know, I was reading it wanting to kind of redefine or like revisit the tides that were coming up, both as literally like exploring water within a piece of work, and also moving with a sense of fluidity, and then how powerful the kind of fluidity can be politically to create space or dismantle, or the kind of shape shifting that Rosie was describing in terms of a creative process, and like redefining the day, redefining who's in the room. And then the same with Dani, the kind of entanglement. I guess for me, the wave, I'm enjoying thinking of like a wave as quite complicated. And then I guess even in that way, building momentum towards the project is really complicated. And I don't think I know any more than I did when I started dancing. It seems so dependent on so many different factors and so many different gatekeepers still, and how much a project needs to still assimilate into predefined power structures, and how much we can, yeah, like flow through them, and as I have sights for hopes of change, I guess. Roundabout way. Maybe it touched on an answer.
Thank you, Alexandrina. Shall we go back to what's in the chat? If Michelle can help me, because I know that we've also had some replies from Katia. Meanwhile, thank you, Katia, for picking up on all the questions that were left behind.
Some comments in there which have responded to some of the questions that we weren't able to answer at the end of her talk. And I was wondering whether the three presenters might be able to talk a little bit about how, because what strikes me about all three of your kind of presentations is how in your own ways you've all had to find ways to disrupt power in order to be able to claim some kind of power and agency for yourselves in terms of the way that you're approaching trying to dance otherwise. And it was something that Katia had alluded to as she talked a little bit about trying to move away from some of those kind of very kind of authoritarian dominant structures which don't always serve our purposes, into creating some kind of individual or collective agency to be able to recognise power and kind of advocate change from the ground up. And I didn't know whether each of you could talk a little bit about how, whether that resonates with your practice, because it feels like it's come through in the way that you've kind of framed what you're doing. So maybe Rosie first.
Yes, I don't know if I will get the words out cohesively. There's something for me around the value, and I'm talking more about within British society, because I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but the value that we place on children, and the barrier that we often come up against with our work is we're just making work for children, and does it really matter what it looks like? Does it really matter what they get? And this kind of constant undervaluing of humans just because they are younger than us, and that kind of ageism that accumulates there, and I've forgotten what you're. Tell me the question again, because I just went off on a ramble.
Yeah. It's just about how you've managed to create kind of a set. You've created a powerful position for yourself by the way that you've organised things differently, and it's really allowed you to kind of create some agency with your processes in a way which strikes me as being a really good model.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding me, because what I wanted to speak to was that it feels like whilst we're making a performance for young audiences and the adults that kind of accompany them, we're also having to do a lot of advocacy for those young audiences to have the space to experience performance in the way that they want to, and coming across a lot of kind of attitudinal barriers around what a child should do in a performance space. And through the process of the making process that we're in currently, there's been hugely chaotic spaces that have felt really confrontational to some adults that walked into the room, and there's children being loud and themselves and taking up space, and it's really struck me in this process how difficult adults have found that children are really taking up space and not being told to sit down, or you have to do it this way, or you need to do this now, not later, or we've moved on from this. So yeah, I think that's something that's coming through loud and clear at the moment.
That's fantastic. And Dani and Alexandrina, I don't know if you'd be happy to respond, and then I can see we've got a question from Richard White after that. So Dani next, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I feel like the idea of this is very much about, I agree with you, power relationships and power intersections, and that they're very complex, you know, in terms of examining my own positionality in relation to working in Wales, and then kind of thinking through all these different aspects, of course. But I suppose what I'm really feeling at the moment is the need to use the power I have to kind of enable some agency for particularly just around obviously the Palestinian context, but the idea of using that power in some way that can be helpful. And actually this kind of relates to Richard White's comment in the chat, because he says that entangled thread of colonization and terraforming is, in my honest opinion, a way into attending to transposed human and non-human lives, and thereby to healing the wounds. And I think that's an interesting idea about healing and repair. And I think that is, I don't really have an answer. I'm just sort of talking.
We did say at the beginning all these things might come out and they're quite half-formed and slippery. Yeah, because they're quite complex, aren't they?
Yeah, but just to say, so I guess it's like creating spaces of agency and power, maybe.
Great, thank you.
It's making me think, if I can just jump in, this idea of healing and repair, I'm kind of linking it back to what Katia was talking about earlier in terms of activist practices needing to both resist but also create. So I wonder whether these two forces are similar to the need for, you know, attending to the wounds, but also enabling the healing process and therefore the growth of something new. I wonder whether there are links there with what Katia was talking about earlier.
But absolutely, it's a cycle. It's all cyclical. It's all one and the same. Like life, death, destruction, fire makes the ash, makes the land fertile. All these mega environmental structures. I think like I love the affirmation of like we've made power an agency, and then at the same time I really feel the impossibility of it, and I really feel the continual like squashing of it. And I'm thinking about doubt, the how insidious like the dominant power structures are just made to doubt, and that like shakes these sort of foundations of selfhood. And then when we speak about healing and repair, like where are the tensions around that when it comes to chronic illness or disability, and how do we, and recovery, like, or when even we think like globally, like to recover, I don't know how to do that and how to honor everybody's different experiences of that, knowing that we all carry such different histories and cultures. And so the agency was such a motivator. Like when I first started making work, I felt so kind of imprisoned by how my body and the bodies of people like me, I guess, were seen, and all these layers that felt like they weren't really me, but they were kind of my history, and all those violences. And so agency felt like a big one to try and reclaim. And then I'm also confronted by the lack of agency I have as a disabled maker, as a Black person. Like I just, there are things where I don't have agency, and how to, I kind of want to go back myself. I think I do have agency. I think as within disability, it's complicated. It's really complicated. I think maybe within Blackness and race, it's like different, but within disability, it feels very like my body fails, you know, compared to the kind of capitalist version of productivity. It fails. So where do we go?
Dani, thank you, Alexandrina. Dani, yes.
Coming off the back of Alexandrina's point there, and just to say, I've just been reflecting as well about the idea of repair again and healing, and recognizing that actually damage is always still being done. So like how do we talk about healing and repair anyway? Because in all of these ways that we're talking in all of these different contexts we're bringing in, actually they're not a post moment, are they? So as well, so I just thought I'd say that.
Yeah. And actually, in response to Dani, that's something that the kind of pluriversal thinking kind of lends itself to, in the sense that whatever it is we're trying to attend to, understanding that things are never static is a core principle in how we then might respond. Yeah, that we can never come to a point where things are fixed or clear, because this kind of entangled mesh we all have relating to one another is constantly ever evolving. Yeah, so.
Yes, and this idea of failure, I find, super rich in the sense that Katia was also talking about attempts, activist attempts that failed, and then, how do we activate ourselves otherwise? I wonder whether Tony Spencer's comment links with that. It's in the chat, and Tony says, interested as you speak about the slippery intersection between power dynamics and deeply entrenched narratives about what a child is and how they should be, what a human is and how they should be, what the landscape is and how it should be. When someone or a group is fixed in both a power dynamic and a narrative, what are the cracks we can slip through into a generative unknown together? So when we're failing within the mold that has been assigned to us, how do we find ways of moving forward or moving, regardless of whether it's forward, moving, being in those cracks, and therefore finding ways of being and moving otherwise? So it's very...
Yeah. And moving without the moving, like with other adrenaline filled, like
productivity driven,
let's just try and do it
goal oriented type of.
But also burnout that comes with activism or the pressure of being a kind of spokesperson on a single issue, or like these things that can kind of also interrupt flow, or like separate communities, through isolating the one superstar, even,
Yes, and thank you. So Tony is saying, yes, moving to include stillness and rest, moving to include collapse. Yeah.
I can see Vicky's added a comment in there just saying that this kind of chimes with some of Katia's ideas about horizontality. Vicky, is there anything, is there anything you want to ask in relation to that, Vicky?
Yeah, it just struck me when we think about this destination of healing and repair, or like healing as a destination, and actually, it's never going to be achieved at that macro level, but there are kind of weaves towards that, and it just chimed with my thinking about Katia's mention of horizontality. She said horizontality is both a horizon and a practice. We walk towards it whilst enacting it as a praxis, and it's an ethical operation. And it just sort of reminded me when she was talking about working at a local level, like everyday socialism, everyday activism, which is our own kind of small micro step towards a horizon that's there. We move towards it, but we're never really going to achieve it in a kind of conventional grand narrative sense. But yet, can we work out and spread our own horizon? I don't know, I'm thinking like some kind of beautiful cape around us, as a different way to think about, the I suppose neoliberal quests towards getting it right, getting it done. We'll be all right once we've fixed this. We'll be all right once we get to, developing a model for this or a model for that. But what about staying with the kind of modeling and activism? Yeah, I think I'm going around in a loop, but it kind of challenges some of that thinking for me.
I wondered, Dani, Rosie and Alexandrina, the extent to which the idea that Katia proposed about the kind of shifting and changing of roles in groups and collectives, whether that resonates with any of your current practices, the idea that you shouldn't have kind of people who have expertise in particular areas, but you kind of allow everybody to step into different roles. And I wonder whether that's something you already do, or something which you think might be a kind of interesting step.
I can speak to that a little bit. It's not something that necessarily we do within our team, but it resonates somehow for me in terms of the children that we meet. And this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but as you were just thinking about, as you were talking about healing and repair, and there's a lovely book, Zagazoo, by Quentin Blake, if anyone knows that, and it's about a couple who are gifted a child in the post, and every day they wake up and the child is a different animal, and about meeting that child in the animal form that it is on that day. And somehow that speaks to meeting the children that we meet in a particular performance, and then how the team that we have around that, because it is improvised and they will have bespoke interactions with the children that they meet, they have to shift, and you can't ever just say, well, this person's going to do this. Although we do have a dance team and a tech team, they always have to shift depending on the audience that they meet in the space. Yeah, it was a bit of a ramble, but kind of speak.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a question from Anna Laura for Rosie. Could you please repeat the name of that story or book?
Yeah, Zagazoo.
Would you mind putting it in the chat when you have the chance, so that we know how it's spelled? Thank you.
Yeah, and Daniela, I can also see there's one further comment that's been added on in about staying with the trouble.
Yes.
Melanie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, there was a request from Lucy to Dani. Would Dani be able to reference the people pieces she quoted? I would love to do some follow-up reading and find some new resources. Oh, yes, you already responded. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Oh, and the book is also on BBC iPlayer in animation form. Thank you, Gemma. Yes, I don't know if people are using the Padlet, but I've kind of been copying and pasting comments and also putting some of the notes from the presentations in there, so that we don't forget. But obviously they're editable and you can add and change.
We're just in the last minute,
Yes.
Daniela, and I didn't know whether there's anything anyone wanted to say before, because I think we've had all the questions in the chat.
I'm putting the Padlet link again in the chat. Thank you, Lucy, for reminding us. They're probably buried in the very long chat.
Yeah. So whether there's any final thoughts from any of our presenters before we...
Stefan, there's a comment from Stefan. Rosie's comment now reminds me of how, as listeners, we can try to meet the other's felt sense afresh every time, to listen without agenda. The radical acceptance of everything by Anne Weiser-Cornell, Living a Focusing Life.
Great, that sounds like one for the Padlet. That brilliant.
I was thinking around compassion that Dani was speaking of, and then I was thinking about power, and I'm thinking, can we collaborate fluidly with power, or like how does, again, like how do we do the repair? Because we want to get horizontal, but we're not horizontal yet. There are vertical structures. So what is the kind of intradependency of that, or like how do we collaborate the pluriverse like upwards to kind of melt it all down? I'm just thinking, like, what's the, within wanting to undo power structures, where's the collaboration? And as Dani was also saying, it's like, where's the what was the word you used? I can't remember. It's completely gone.
Yeah, but that's a great point, Alexandrina, about the horizontality as kind of what we aspire for. But at the same time, you were talking about the multi-layered nature of your work, for example, but, of how we are. So to what extent does horizontality also allow for the multidimensionality of all experience? And therefore, how do we aim for structures of working together, living together, and making work that allow that layer?
Yeah, I think also like this is what it was, that there's destruction in healing and repair, there's destruction. That's kind of the point that Dani was making. And I was thinking, yeah, the thing of when you give up power, you feel like you're being robbed of something, you know? So it's like, but how do we collaborate? Like I don't want to not talk to anybody. I want to talk to people who have the power. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making sense. Just like, how do we bring some of the like sensory nature of this work and the kind of permission of this work to be multiple, to be plural? How do we bring that into structures that are very, very static and deeply invested in hierarchy?
Yeah, I think
in productivity and in objectives and in goals and in results and so on. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Daniela, for chairing that session. Thank you to our guest speakers, our panelists, some really thought-provoking work there. And these questions, like how do we collaborate with power, structures, working in the system outside of it, are questions that keep coming up in our own discussions, the project team, and we'll keep sort of coming back in waves, in tides, gathering momentum each time as we move on with our various events. But for now, thank you so much to this group, to our guests. And we are going to have a pause here right now, and we'll be back again at 6:30 with our final conversation of the evening and some closing remarks. But again, a Zoom
break. We will put the Padlet back up, but let's just also take some time away from the screens.
Okay. Yeah, and great. And maybe, Michelle, just before we start, just a reminder that we are recording, and if people don't wish to have their cameras on, that's fine. Obviously not the presenters, that would be disaster. Yeah, if audience members don't wish to be recorded, then please do switch off. Okay, Michelle.
Thank you. So welcome back, everybody, to this final part of day one. We hope you've been enjoying the presentations, and thank you to everyone for your questions in both the chat and the Padlet. And during the break, I was reflecting on some of the kind of ideas that Katia had talked about in her keynote speech at the beginning about organising ourselves in different ways to do things differently. And in conversation one with Alexandrina, Rosie and Dani, it felt like there were really good examples in their practice of how they'd been doing that. And actually the role of power came up quite a lot in that initial discussion, and it made me start to consider during the break what we as a dance community might need to learn or unlearn about power in order to stop thinking about it as some kind of finite resource that either we have or we don't have access to. Perhaps if we start to uncover or recognise forms of personal or collective power, which feel more sustainable or renewable beyond the reach of some of those kind of dominant structures and models, yeah, perhaps that might be really helpful for us in terms of finding how we might do things otherwise. So yeah, just some thoughts over the break. Okay. So conversation two, and we're really pleased to invite contributions from Pawlet, Brookes, Callum Anderson and Julia Pond. If you've only just joined us, each person is going to introduce themselves, and they're going to have 10 minutes in which to offer some thoughts and ideas from their particular perspective. Again, please feel free to keep adding your ideas and comments onto the Padlet or the chat. And if there's anything you want directed to Pawlet, Callum or Julia, then we'll try to pick those up at the end of the three offerings. So I'm going to pause now and hand over to you, Pawlet, as speaker number one.
Thank you. Thank you. So for those that don't know me, my name is Pawlet Brookes. I'm the CEO and Artistic Director of Serendipity Institute for Black Arts and Heritage. What I thought I'd do to kick things off is just to run a 2-minute film, which will give you a little bit of context, and then I'll back that up, telling you a little bit more about Serendipity and what we've been doing and how we do it. But the film will give you a little bit of a teaser into the work that we do. So if we could just play the film, that'd be fantastic.
Huh? Okay, one second. Full like whole, hold me close. Education isn't escaping, it's evolving. These colonizers were confused, semicolon. I belong where I fit in, breathe, breath, enough to not forget the rhythms of breaking chains. No slave, if we were, it's only the slaves to love, master of the moment, heartbeat to the polyrhythms of the village. Voices are voyages, these voices are voyages, these words are worlds. Family funded my nurture. My mother made me speak the language of understanding my freedom. Full like soul, in sync with the sound, in sync with the dance, in sync, we are in sync with the dreams that are coming true. We are in sync with the dreams coming true. Full like that.
Thank you. So the film, the poem was written last year, and it was part of LDIF 23. And what we've been doing over the last couple of years is looking at different ways to look at legacy and as part of how we understand the work that we're doing and what we do with it. So, and how do you capture that? Do you just do a film, or do you find a different artist or a different art form? So one year we had Patricia Vesta. She's an illustrator, and she illustrated and she did a spot a day diary to capture the festival. And last year we had Cubs the poet, and he on the spot wrote the poem at the end of the conference to capture what the spirit of what the festival was about. So the festival was Uncovering the Dance Within, Origins and Authenticity, and this is how he captured what we did. The festival has been going 14 years now and has grown over the time, and people travel from all over the world to attend and to be part of the festival and to present the work. The work is culturally specific. It is born out of work coming out of the African and African Caribbean diaspora and the Latinx community where it meets diaspora. And each year it tackles a different issue or a different theme. And we try to cover a range of different ways and how we view dance. So we don't just put things on the main stage at the Curve. A lot of the work is also site specific, you know, and done specifically and nurtured in different spaces and places. We also document. We've got like 25 publications out now, and again with voices from around the world, you know, looking at issues that we encounter when we're looking at dance coming out of the Black community. We've also, because heritage is part of our remit, we've been looking at what that means as well in terms of looking at the legacy of Black British dance and where it stands, starting with the work from 1939 to present day in terms of all the things that we do within the festival. We look at dance on film, and we also, in recent times, have started to look quite a lot of how you can use technology as a creative tool rather than just something in terms of functionality. So last year we introduced B-Haptics, and looked at how do you work with haptics technology and the deaf community. But what we ended up doing was working not just in BSL, but in ASL, because we worked with a deaf American artist. So we had to go from BSL to ASL, but also technology and the language isn't written in sign language. And so we had to create another language specifically in order to do the project. Although it's not registered as a language, you had to create that space in order to do the work. And what we looked at was how would it empower Antoine, you know, as an artist, you know, would he be able to feel the music as if he was a hearing person? And it was fantastic because we also worked with a jazz artist, Soweto Kinch, and the two came together. The work has been so successful that Soweto and Antoine have gone on to do some work in Los Angeles as well. We're now in discussion with the Curve Theatre, looking at how can we take the haptics technology and look at it in terms of what happens for audiences. Can we build it into the seats so that audiences might have another response if, you know, deaf audiences attend? So we're doing quite a lot of things. So we're pushing boundaries whilst also showcasing work in terms of the work that we're doing. So this year we've got camouflage embodied dance. We've got the National Dance Theatre of Jamaica. And we've got, again, looking at the notion of film. So we're looking at, you know, film and looking at policies and that have come out of some of the films that we've done. So we've got Witch Doctor, which was Jean-Léon Destine, who did that film in 1952 and won an award. And then we're going straight through to present day in terms of films that we've made last year. But in the middle, you've got films like Steel and Skin with Peter Blackman, and the things that Peter Blackman was saying in 1979 hasn't shifted ground. And that's really, really interesting when you look at some of the films that we're looking at. We're also going to interrogate things like animated and all the Black contributions to animated over the last 20 years, because we have that now within our archive. And again, look at the policies and the things that people have said and what's shifted. So although the festival is a festival to come and see new work and to touch on different techniques, so we don't stick to the canon of ballet. It's also a depository as well in terms of how do we then create a legacy around the work and the contribution of Black artists in the UK and beyond in terms of their voices and documenting those voices. So it's playing a number of different roles, you know, and is groundbreaking and is leading and is tackling particular issues that come up. So for instance, we've got 22 artists coming over to perform as part of National Dance Theatre of Jamaica. Now, the thing about Jamaica, it's part of the Commonwealth, but it is the only Commonwealth country where you have to apply for a visa. So you've got a barrier to entry in order for putting on art, in terms of putting on work. But yet it's part of the Commonwealth, and no other Commonwealth country with British sovereignty has to do that. So you see the battles that we're fighting immediately and the things that we have to do in order to try and put the work on. So last year we had 2 Jamaicans, one got through. The second visa got through 6 weeks after the event, and you still have to pay for it. And so, you know, it's understanding the complexity of when you're saying you're working with diversity and what it means, you know, in terms of tackling those issues, putting the work on, trying to make it center stage, the arguments that you have to have with venues, you know, the othering, the labeling, you know, where it gets pushed. It really, really is very important when you start to contextualize everything that comes in this really, really rich festival. So LDIF, Let's Dance International Frontiers. Frontiers suits what we do, that it is frontiers, it is boundaries, it is borders, and we keep pushing through with those borders every year. The work doesn't just stop within the festival because of the publications, but also in terms of the work that we have to do in order to get to the festival, and whether that's making a new short film or, you know, working with technology, you know, it's not stagnant in that it's just in that week. It is all year round in order to navigate the things that we're doing. So that would be, I think I've stuck to time, my little insight into what we're doing at LDIF and the work that we do at Serendipity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Paulette. I didn't need to interrupt you at all. It was perfectly timed from 10 minutes, so thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so next I'm going to hand you over to Callum Anderson. So we'll just spotlight Callum.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen quickly if that's okay.
Yeah, I can see that really clearly, Callum.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So yes, hello, my name is Callum Anderson. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a white man in my early 30s. I have short brown hair and I wear dark rimmed glasses. and a mustard coloured jumper. I'm coming to you from the little corner of my flat that I like to call my office, and I have a white background behind me. I have something of a portfolio career. I am a dance artist and researcher, but also an arts marketer. And today I'm speaking to you from, or with my Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival hat on, as Senior Marketing Officer for Access and Communities. So I already feel a little bit weird that I'm not talking about my own work, but about work of other people. So I hope you forgive me if I have to be a little bit vague. So before I get into mapping what dance looks like with Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival, I just thought I'd give a little bit of context. So we are an arts charity and national portfolio organisation on the south coast of the UK. And our activity is split into 3 strands. So we have Brighton Dome, which comprises 3 historic contemporary live arts venues, which presents over 600 events across any and all arts forms you can think of, including community and participation. And we are a receiving house for tours, as well as commissioning work from local, national and international artists. Brighton Festival then, on the other hand, is the biggest curated cross arts festival in England, which happens each May, and started back in 1967, welcoming, and since 2009, we've welcomed a guest director who work alongside our team to curate the festival. And in 2014, we had Heafford, so dance has certainly played and continues to play a pivotal role in what we present. The final string to our bow, if you will forgive the very bad pun, is Create Music, which is a music education service, and we teach over 4,000 children and young people across Brighton, Hove and East Sussex. So if I get more into the mapping of dance at Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival, we work closely with programming partners, including our local dance organisation, South East Dance. We work with Dance Consortium, which is a group of 20 theatres across the UK, to Tour Dance, and also Without Walls, who work with 42 festivals and arts organisations across the UK to bring outdoor arts and outdoor performance to communities. This lovely picture that you can see here is from Brighton Festival 2023, and this piece was Choo Choo, which was choreographed by Anusha Subramaniam and her company Bija. So as you can see, it's very much within the city. Audiences can see it for free and often happen upon the work rather than planning to go and see it. Recent performances in our seasons have included Le Ballet Trocadero de Monte Carlo. Last year we had Dada Masillo, and we also hosted Breaking Convention, which comes out of Sadler's Wells. We've hosted Ballet Theatre UK many times, and last year, after 7 years of closure, 2 of our smaller venues reopened, and we were lucky enough to have Gecko and their new work Kin, which I believe is just finished at the National Theatre. So I think, if I sideline slightly, with our 2 new venues, smaller venues opening, we are seeing that kind of slightly less mainstream work, which is very exciting from my point of view anyway. This season, we have Sao Paulo Dance Company. I believe it's their first UK tour, as well as companies Thick and Tight, Bottisiva, local company Vincent Dance Theatre, as well as a children's dance partnership with South East Dance and their Little Big Dance Festival and Symposium, of which Choo Choo is returning, this time in a kind of studio space rather than outside. Oh, why am I not going forward? There we go. So I just wanted to speak around access and communities a little bit, because that is quite a large part of my role. I work with the programming and participation team to develop these audiences, and I like to think of it, I'll come on and talk a little bit more about cracking open the arts slightly. And that's what I hope to do, whether that's by removing barriers by providing BSL interpretation or captioning for deaf audience members, audio description for visually impaired audience members, or relaxed and chilled performances. for audiences, often with neurodivergence. The other side then, the communities, is where we take Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival out into the wider community. So we have schemes such as Our Place, where we programme artists, both national and local, with steering groups around the wider community of Brighton and Hove. And these artists work with and for those communities, and the communities very much dictate what they want to see, which is, I think, a really nice way of not forcing things onto audiences. We also remove financial barriers, so that could be a pay it forward scheme, which gives free tickets to communities and organisations and charities to free tickets to come and see our shows, as well as another scheme called Audience Club, where we also look to remove the price of things like bus fare, parking, petrol, all those other sort of financial barriers to actually coming to the venue in the first place. I just want to spend a little bit of time on my pluriversal wanderings, which seems a bit funny when I'm not speaking about my own work. So I'll see what I can do, but I think that part of my role within marketing is this balance between demystification and discovery. I think we are all guilty, and I will put my hand up and say that I am also one of these people that can often use quite abstract language to describe my work. And I guess it's somehow, for dance audiences, that's great, because we understand what that means, and we have learned that language that we are reading, whereas for other audiences and non-dance audiences, it's, well, what are we actually going to see when we come to the theatre? I think sometimes that gets lost, but without taking away the discovery aspect of it, because I certainly think that one of the joys of art is discovering something new. It's that aha moment of being sat in a theatre or outside of a theatre, and finding something which, so yeah, it's that balance between uncovering and cracking something open, but not giving the game away entirely. I mentioned earlier that we work with programming partners, and I think that we probably only see them, our partners, particularly at my level, once a year, and it doesn't really do a lot other than, what are you doing? Oh, you're doing that? Okay, I've got this, right, great. And we crack on and we go back into that sort of siloed working. So I guess I wonder what it might look like if we were able to work closer with them, and by doing that, work towards guiding audiences to other work and to other venues. And I think I've put there that, you know, organisations are protective of their own resources and of their own audiences. And I guess I wonder what it might mean to be less protective of that and actually more welcoming and allowing, yeah, light through the cracks, perhaps, of the dance world, and both so that we can go out, but other people can come in. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I think that's where I would like to end it.
Yeah, you've got another minute, but if you feel you've come to the end, yeah.
There you go.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Callum. Thank you. So our last speaker now is Julia Pond. So Julia, just going to spotlight you now.
Okay. Thank you, and I'm gonna just share my screen. So, went all the way to the end, big reveal. So my name is Julia Pond. I am a dance artist and researcher. I've had a checkered past, which also includes time doing marketing and editorial, parenting, teaching dance, studying international relations, and moving around in different countries. I am a white woman in my mid-40s. My background is blurred. My pronouns are she, her. And you'll hear from my accent that I was born in the United States, but I've called the UK home for the last 13 years. My first slide is my artistic and theoretical pluriverse. These are past and present teachers, mentors, colleagues, and friends without whom my work could not exist and wouldn't exist. My forms of relating with them have included performing, reading, conversing, collaborating, producing, supporting, advising, and hiring. They work in dance and outside dance in fields including dance, tech, philosophy, and international development. This is not a complete list. I chose to place the slide first to sort of practice being part of my pluriverse of practice. I'm not separate from these people. My work isn't separate from these people in much the same way that I don't believe my research is totally separate from who I am as a person. Leora Fridman puts this really well and speaks to what I'm trying to get at when she says, she realized that systems of cis hetero patriarchy and white supremacy were behind my desire to be only a body or only an artist or only an activist, and to keep those worlds closed off from one another, to keep myself separate and to keep myself separate from, say, yours. So this is something that is very present in my work and research right now, is dismantling these things in myself to the degree that I can, with all of my all of the blind spots that all of us have. And I guess around this slide in the ether, you might imagine a studio collective that I've been a part of, where myself and 9 other dancers rented a studio so we could have cheap space to do regular work. You might imagine practices, again, in marketing and editorial, working in the travel industry for 9 years, but now consulting with arts organizations like Independent Dance and White Cross Street Party. You might imagine motherhood, a sense of being a voluntary migrant and not being quite sure where home is. So lots of different things feeding into the work. I don't want to create strict boundaries. But I will talk a little bit about how my work at the moment is focused on political economy and dance and the entanglement of the two. My motivation for that has to do with really the relationship of economy, capitalist economy, with environmental degradation and destruction, and that being connected with colonialism and the violences, the huge horrific violences going on in this world right now. And so in my little slice, here's my way of trying to address this. How can we look at economy in a different way using the body? So also, what are dance's potentials for social impact? Little bit of context for this. Economics, I don't view it as a hard science. The people who make the rules about it are also the people who, they're making the rules about what they're studying, right? So it's not objective. And I say political economy because economics is also a choice. It is political, and they are indeed choices, not imperatives. The notion of training is a bridge between dance and capitalism. I would say that they're both experts in training. A body can be trained to serve many visions, and an industry, the dance industry, can be and has been shaped in many ways. Likewise, capital has trained us in productivity culture. I don't see dance as kind of a magic bullet towards a more progressive, better, and more connected world. Instead, I try to ask how dance can help us to flesh out a positive politics, rather than the politics of refusal that Katia Valenzuela Fuentes referenced earlier in today's session. So to flesh out the idea of what a generative future economy could feel like. And so two conditions that I work with in relation to dance improvisation in this way are the condition of continuous expiry, so a continuous disappearance of unique moments in movement and time as a kind of anti-growth, anti-endless economic growth laboratory, and also the activation of sensorial engagement, perhaps through slowing down or helped by slowing down, which help to create maybe a lab for rehearsing different forms of relation to space, time, and each other that could help us understand what a different, more generative kind of economics could feel like in the body. My work takes the form of improvisational performance and practice, investigating themes like value, growth, productivity, and performance. I'm engaged in PhD research at the moment. I consider my choreography, expanded choreography. I'm moving towards making for public spaces that people can encounter. I use humor, and I have an interest in fiction, or what is sometimes called the real fake. So just sharing a couple little tidbits of pieces. This is a fictional company and performance installation that I've been working on for the last 2 years called Bread. Bread asks, what if work made you feel good? It's a participatory performance in a fictional company, and it invites participants to rethink value and productivity. It invites you into an open plan office where you get hired and trained to engage in absurdist tasks that force you to rest and slow down, like allowing bread dough to rise on your bare skin. Essentially, we use structures of office-like life to question hustle culture. I spent some time developing this with my collaborators, Manuela Albrecht and Mia Schmid, and we performed in some festivals in London, and now are readapting this for high street spaces. So I'm really interested in how work can go to unexpected spaces, to spaces where people can encounter it just as part of their daily lives, and also to reach audiences who might not think that dance is for them, to sort of smuggle dance into different contexts, if you will, and smuggle art into different contexts. So here you just have a couple photos and then one of our motivational posters from the installation. In my PhD research right now, I am investigating an entanglement of dance and degrowth economics. This is economics that is other than just infinite growth of GDP. Within that, questions of enoughness come up, the potentials and the frustrations of what is hidden from view or hidden from situated outside, perhaps power or visibility. And also the fragile body or the aging body. So the economist Tim Jackson argues that consumerism's most glittering prize is the promise of immortality itself. And the fundamental accelerative, expansive directionality of capital sits in opposition to the direction of the body, which, after initially expanding and growing, begins to decline. It might break, ages, and especially under our current system, we might say that it depreciates. So entering into an improvisation and poetic writing to a creative intimacy with these themes, expiry, depreciation, enoughness, and desire, this is becoming a way to practice a destabilization of the concept of endless growth through felt knowledge and through practice rather than theory. So in my work, this takes, I move, I write poetry, I do cyclical practice to try to disrupt a sense of linear time. And I see the writing as a kind of site where the two unlikely partners of economics and the body can meet and mix. Am I doing okay on time? Can I just ask?
You've got another minute.
Great. So that's taking also other forms now, this idea of the real fake. Maybe by making something fake, we can get to something more real in our post-truth era. And there's some very, very work in progress-y images here of developing performance research project which appropriates the figure of the street evangelist, kind of connecting capital and religion, something that thinkers like Georgia Agamben have written lots on about the fictionalization of money has taken us to a point where economics is essentially a matter of faith, and it has become a new religion. And so this research asks, you know, what if we appropriate the figure of the street evangelist, play with ideas like channeling and preaching, but in this case, to imagine what a life-giving economy could be like. And within that practice, I'm creating this pamphlet to give out at this performance. And just to add a couple ideas, going onwards, going inwards, how can the pluriverse be a practice? It's not just a fashionable concept, but something we practice. The how of what we do feels very important, to not just reform the industry and reform our institutions, but to change how we do things, the practice-based change. What could pluriversal aesthetics look like? What would pluriversal professional and economic practices look like? So maybe refusal to approach the field from a positionality of scarcity, rather than scarce resources and scarce opportunities. How can we claim abundance as practitioners? What can we shift in our modes of offering and accessing opportunities and funding, especially for freelance artists, that can offer increased flexibility, more horizontal perspectives and forms of direction, essentially less hierarchy, and more global perspectives, hearing from people from more of a range of backgrounds, and also reclaiming the space of the dancer as an artist with a perspective, rather than, you know, kind of completing this move that's been going on in dance for a long time of the agency of the dancing body.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you, Pawlet and Callum, as well. And I found listening to you each have quite kind of different standpoints. I found it really fruitful to listen to all three different experiences. And what's interesting, that even though the issues and ideas that you bring are very particular to the distinct context in which you each operate, there seem to be some central themes there in terms of how we relate to others, how we work within structures that don't always feel that they serve our needs, and how we have to be really imaginative to think how we might be able to do things otherwise. So we are happy to now to take some questions, but I'd just like to say to the speakers that in addition to taking questions from anyone who's been listening, do also feel free to be able to pose questions to one another if that feels appropriate for you. So, okay.
I wondered, Michelle, if I've lined up a few questions from the chat, but I wondered if we might start with questions for one another, actually, if any of the presenters have got anything they want to comment on or question or ask from each other first. You don't have to. You might just be taking it all in, because actually, while you're thinking about that, let's start with Daniela's question. In the chat there, it says, I'm interested in how time and different conceptions of time intersect with the practices all three of you presenters have introduced. So the time of a visa application versus when they're needed, the time involved in introducing audiences to work they will be seeing in the future, and a counter-capitalist notion of time, etc. Maybe we should put that first in order of presenters. So Pawlet, time.
That was coming, yeah. In terms of time, well, we program roughly about anything about 18 months in advance to 2 years in advance. And in terms of the visas, it's all part of the discussions at that point in time, understanding the country. But then there is a time frame that you've got to do it in, whatever, and it's roughly 3 months before the actual date. And so you're flying by the seat of your pants every year, because you know, there is no guarantee. And so although you put in for the visas, and we've got 22 in the company, there's no guarantee all 22 will get through, because for different reasons they pull different people out. So one year we had with one company, one of the artists did a musician's trick in the middle of it, and so because they thought it was sleight of hand and it was a black person, it was a pickpocket, so he didn't get through. So we had to re-choreograph that whole section of the work for when they arrived. We had to do something different. And so, you know, there are no guarantees. So the question is, do you not do the work? You know, of course you try to do the work, but you know, there is just no guarantees of who gets through and who doesn't get through. And people have arrived on the day and ended up going straight on the stage that evening, although technically they should have been here, you know, a few days before. But it's no different from the system that I've just said that I set off on. I don't even know what today is. I think it was Monday, and I've only just got to Memphis because I got caught up in customs in Dallas, and then couldn't get out of Dallas, and so 24 hours later I'm out of Dallas. You know, it's just, you know, it's, you know, I flippantly say it's traveling while it's black, but actually we've been working on a program to give to black artists of things to help them navigate some of the problems. It's not saying that they will go away, but just, you know, things that you could flag up that might make things easier to get artists through in terms of the things that they need to do. So we've been producing a series of guides. You know, the other guide is an IP guide in terms of intellectual property and what that might mean as well. So we've just put, again, you can get that on our website, but the whole concept of time, you know, there is a, you know, the time frames to put on a festival, and then there's these little points in between that you have to navigate, and they are set. They tend to be set times in terms of how visa applications and things work, and when you need to do it by in order when you're going to get it. Also, you know, in terms of the T5 visas, and, you know, putting it in our application each year so we can do visas and sponsorships and things like that. That happens every year, and you've got to prove that you've used your allocation, otherwise you're not going to get the same allocation. You know, it's a rolling program, and you know, you're dealing with
Paulette, I just wanted to ask you, at the end of Julia's talk, she talked a little bit about enoughness, and I wonder, when you describe your experience, it sounds as if that sense that you don't have enough time for all the things you'd like to attend to. It feels like a really kind of tangible kind of I can physically feel it in my body as you're describing it, the feeling that there's not enough of this resource because of some of the barriers that
you've got. The barrier is time, and the barrier is legislation, and the barrier is policy, and, you know, and you've got all these things to navigate. And when you look at black dance in the UK from 1930s, late 30s to present, you can run that in tandem with all the policies that have come out around black people and immigration, and, you know, the sus laws, everything. You can see when things happen, there is. And, you know, and then you're caught up in these other things that which are out of your control, which you're trying to navigate in order to do what feels to me like the most basic thing, just put a show on. And it's just not, it's not that simple. And so it's learning what that is and understanding it, and where we are within those time constraints or those issues that you're juggling. You know, all artists are juggling that with what's going on with local authorities at the moment. But, you know, in local authorities going into administration, and what does that mean if you're dependent on a local authority for your funding? How do you manage that? You know, are you now then just in the hands of like the Arts Council or grants, or what sort of subsidy? It does change the relationship, because now what used to be one of the bigger givers, you know, or used to be really, really important, the power dynamics have shifted. So, you know, the power dynamics shift because, you know, no longer it's the local authorities. What does that mean when some of the dynamics has also shifted within education? You know, because education was another. So all these things are shifting. So we're playing within this quicksand, and all of them have time constraints of when you apply, how you apply, when you get the resource, if you get the resource, and are you able to put the piece of work on? And if not, and if you do put it on, is it what you originally imagined, or have you had to curtail it to fit the purse strings. So realistically, you're curating and delivering something totally different because it's not what you set out to do. So time's a really, really important factor. And there's a number of different players that you don't immediately see, but they're there, and each one has an impact, you know, on what you're able to do. I don't know if that helps answer the question at all,
Yes,
or just
fantastic.
raise more questions.
I have two more follow-up things I want to ask you, but I think we need to move on to Callum. So I'll resist. Yeah, Callum.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think, yeah, introducing audiences to work is a really tricky one, and is certainly one that changes with each audience. We've certainly seen for our, day in, day out audience that, we call them the dome audience. Since COVID has happened, the booking has become much later. And it's usually within the last week that we see a massive influx of ticket bookings. But we're still giving them a 3-month lead time or a 6-month lead time in terms of brochures and all of that stuff. Versus, for example, in March, we've got a show specifically for a PMLD audience, so that's people with profound and multiple learning difficulties, and that the company that we're working with was very clear that we had to have a 3-month lead time because of the additional work that the audience has to do to make sure that they can book the minibus or the people that they need to accompany them to the theatre, find a toilet that they can use, all of those kinds of things that we don't really take into consideration. So I find that an interesting, what's the word I'm looking for? Tension within my role, I guess, I would say. And similarly, BSL audiences, the deaf audiences that require BSL interpretation, that's a slightly longer process to go through, and also is very much, for our audiences at any rate, dictated by who the interpreter is. Some people just will not come if it's not the interpreter that they don't want to see or that they don't engage with. So there's lots of things that affect the time. And I guess also sort of talk to what Pawlet was saying about education and getting groups from schools in. That's a very different beast for ensuring that the teachers have enough lead time to contact parents and all of that stuff that happens. And often we don't have that time, and yet we have companies, calling out for those audiences that we just cannot get in. So it's there's definitely a tension around time and communication.
Yeah, and time being a scarce resource. Julia, I mean, you talked about enoughness. You also talked in your talk about slowing down. So just some reflection from you about Daniela's
I'm super into time. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I want to say, Pawlet, what you said just brought up for me how much time, it's like time is power in a way. The ability to control your time is power. And so that cutting across, race and also class, doing time shifts and wage labor versus a flexible sort of white collar job, time, the relationship with mobility, like enforced waiting for a visa, enforced waiting, enforced suspension of your life, right? I thought also of a colleague of mine, Mia B's piece, which references the time she waited for gender affirming care through taking, running in like hundreds of circles, one for each day that she waited. And then that kind of is like a tension between how, so in Bread, I was kind of interested in how rest is resistance in a way. So Tricia Hersey's work, she has this whole amazing body of work, about the NAP ministry and rest being resistance, and Audre Lorde writing about, how caring for yourself is a way to resist structures of power, coming from a tradition of, Black feminists, but also, I think there are so many lessons there for the rest of us as well, from that leadership. And And so that tension between like the power over and then taking power by taking your time back, and maybe how that interacts with, you know, Marx and the idea of labor time being something like that is your value, is your time, because you sell your work essentially in our capitalist system. And then, so I'm sort of just delivering a web of different lenses here, but the last one that came up for me was around, yeah, the scarcity of time as, for me, as like an artist mother, and going back to the arts, you know, more full-time 5 years ago with a small child. But then how that scarcity that you spoke about, Paulette, that scarcity of time, feeling like I don't have enough time to do all the things I'm dying to do. But then also having these very real limits and needs of care a lot on that. And I think, you know, how do you become comfortable with maybe a slow burn, or like just small steps of progress? And you know, all these things are resonating for me.
Yeah, and it strikes me, Julia, that some of the things you talked about when you referred to kind of dance and the interest you have in dance and the kind of political economy, there was something in your talk where you mentioned the kind of notion that we have to kind of be productive. When we think about time, we often have this sense that we should be productive with our time and fit more and more into the time that we have. But actually, some of the things you're talking about are about decelerating, aren't they, and slowing down. But how that feels quite counterintuitive to the cultural mindset many of us have kind of we have about this notion that we need to kind of be productive with the time that we have.
And who mentioned in the last talk about the sort of terror of giving up some power? And I think the way we relate to time is really connected with that, because if we stick with a productive cadence with sort of capitalist clock time, delivering things, hitting goals, then okay, we can stay in that flow. But if we decelerate, if we let go of some of that, it's scary, because maybe you feel that you lose out. I think there's other questions. And
also, this is also a very Western lens through which to look at time. It's not a so that's one of the things about the Pluriverse, to kind of encourage us to think that actually some of these viewpoints and positions that we have are not universal by any stretch of the imagination. So and it's interesting that tomorrow afternoon we have Bayo Akumalafe talking, and he is a kind of thought leader and a post-humanist thinker. And he proposes that when things feel most urgent, that's exactly the time we need to slow down. But there's a counterintuitiveness to that. So it'd be interesting to hear his thoughts in relation to this too. Yeah. So we'll just check to see whether we've had any other questions come in the chat.
Actually, I have a question that I did put in the chat. Right. I didn't just take my, take advantage. It's a question about something that Julia said, and then I just thought it related to all three presenters. When you started and you talked about your connection, your pluriversal connection, like everyone you've worked, not everyone you've ever worked with, that would take, ages, but, those key connections of people that you've worked with, influences on you. And I think it's something we don't talk a lot about in academia. You're measured on your outputs, your work, your this. And it's only been in recent years, I feel, that actually the collective endeavor of working together with other people, or the mentoring that you might receive from really great colleagues along the way, or that person who really helped you out, or whose class you used to take, in dance. There is a question. The question is, how does that work, or how in the other two presenters' work, how do you see that kind of, is there a tension, and how do you see yourselves working with that between your individual endeavor, or the individual endeavor of the institutions that you work for and the organizations that you work for, kind of pitted against others, versus the necessity of collective working to get done what you need to get done? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think serendipity does that in any case. I think we're working with lots of different artists, lots of different concepts, lots of different styles, lots of different techniques, you know, and giving voice, because it goes back to the thing that Michelle said about changing the lens. And when you switch that lens and you put something else forward, that's what I think we've been doing. So it's not curated in the traditional Western way. You know, the art forms and the people on there, it doesn't just traditionally have, say, you know, it's got to be balletical, you know, it has other techniques and styles, and they all are given voice. And it means every year we market the festival from scratch, because we can never get the data from the venues, you know, and stuff like that. And they don't know the work, and you've got to explain things to everybody. You've got to unpack absolutely everything, because it's like you're bringing something foreign, but it's not. It's got more history, more legacy, more power, more all of this deep, but yeah, you're having to tell everyone like it's the very, very first time that they've ever seen this work or heard of it, and explain it to them, you know, in bite sizes that they can understand. And, you know, and we're really careful about what we do with language. So Antoinette Steins, when she writes dance, she spells it with 3 A's, so you dance, yeah. And when we put anything down, then people are always correcting it. They're correcting it without even looking at it. And is it voodoo or is it vadum? Yeah, you know, who says it's what? And so we keep on changing, and we're doing this in any case in terms of the language that you use, the work that we're putting on. And so it's other voices in terms of looking at that. So I think I see serendipity as a conduit rather than it's, you know, in terms of how it's curated. We're just trying to, what I say, the world is, or seems to be, that it's a double-headed coin. And what we're trying to do is flip it so you have heads and tails, and there is another perspective, another view, another voice, another image, another ideology, you know, another concept, you know. And why can't it sit shoulder to shoulder with Western forms? Why is it always othered? Why is it less than? So I think we do this with the work in any case, in terms of what we're trying to put out. And I don't think it's just one voice, you know, one concept, one view. We need to be able to hear these other views, see these other forms, understand them, understand the root of them, you know, understand that thing about partnership and the interplay, understand where things have been taken from one place to the other. So Jean-Léon Destine, as a Haitian choreographer, you know, he worked with Balachine as well as working with Dunham, you know. He also was really, really interesting in the notion of colonization in reverse. Now, his work was out in the 40s, before you get to Miss Lou Bennett in 66 with colonization in reverse, you know. But they were already tackling these sorts of issues. This whole notion of colonization, all this stuff, in lots of ways, it's a nonsense, because, you know, all of this it's been tackled before, but it's not been given the respect because of whose voices was dealing with the work. And that's what's really, really interesting. And that's the challenge that I think that we face with the work that we put on. It's about who respects what, you know, because you're coming out with something, it's not respected, because it's like, oh, what are they doing? You know, what is this? And you want to go, seriously? Is that old chestnut again? And, you know, and you just have to just charge forward with it and just put it out there, irrespective of what everyone else is saying. And that's a challenge. It's a daily challenge to always be counter the populist narrative and the populist and the commodity that I think diversity has become. It's just a commodity, you know, and to be able to put things out which speak with pride and dignity, it is hard when you've been commodified, you know, in that way. So I think we're doing it.
Yeah, and Paulette, it's interesting that image you use of a two-sided coin, where you've got kind of dominant ideas on one side and then everyone who's been othered on the other side.
Yeah.
I wonder whether this kind of pluriversal thinking might encourage us to be able to see that it's like a many-sided dice. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those dice where it's got 12 sides, but I think that feels more representative of the type of ecology we have. And,
yes.
yeah, so the wider we can spread that as a kind of way of kind of considering some of these things, the better.
I think so, definitely.
Yeah. So the question was open to all three presenters, wasn't it? So Julia next, and then perhaps Callum.
I want to say that I wish academia was exactly like your work, Pawlet. I think it's a struggle. I'm rubbing up against it right now in doing PhD work and the hierarchical nature of it, and how do I sit in relation to that? It's a huge institution. I'm not going to change it single-handedly, but how can I stay sane? You know, and I'm aware that I come with tons of privilege and support and stability around me that makes even engaging with it at all much more possible than for so many other amazingly talented people. Oh,
yeah, thank you. And Callum, any thoughts? Just in case you've forgotten the question, it was about kind of the kind of tension between the kind of the kind of need of the individual to maintain their identity, but also to be able to fit into kind of pluriversal ways of being and collective kind of action. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot going on in my brain, so apologies if it doesn't come out very well from what everyone else has also said. I certainly feel this in terms of being a cog in a wider organisation. And from that, I certainly echo what you say, Julia, about, well, what can I do? I'm stuck in this role and I have to do it, which I think is a really, and how do I retain my own voice in that? And I guess if I were to then put it onto the work that I do, it's how do I retain the voice of the artists, and how do I retain the voice of the people who we are having in perform? Because there is a tone of voice that the organisation has that I have to match. So again, I guess that's a tension of all those things that I've kind of already said around language, which is, I was shocked when I found out that the average reading age of an adult in the UK was 9 years old, and that just like totally flipped my thinking on how we are communicating with audiences. And I guess within that, it's the individual audience member in the pluriverse of the audience that I have to engage with. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question. That's just kind of everything that was in my brain. So I do apologise.
You've given us even more to think about. I don't know how I'll be able to get to sleep tonight. So we're just coming to the end of time for this conversation. I can see that there were a few other kind of comments in the chat. So I'll just quickly refer. Sarah Watley has put in a comment here asking us to consider the importance of crip time in rethinking our relationship to time and how there is pressure to conform to normative constructions of time. Vip has also put in something there, a picture of a 144-sided die. So that's a fantastic image, so thank you for sharing that. And then we've got from Oren here, a question about individuation, similar to Alexandrina's question about how maybe power is part of the pluriversal. The multi-sided die. And then Daniela, they're just talking about going back to Katia's idea, but perhaps that might be something we can pick up on tomorrow. Yeah.
Definitely. Great. So can somebody put the one, how many sided die? Can we have that image on the Padlet?
Yeah.
Daniela to do that. Can you? That looks great. I think that image just about sums a few things up. Yeah, that's great. So just a huge thank you to Michelle for chairing, to our panelists for presenting and sharing their work, for traveling. I'm so sorry, Pawlet, for traveling and dealing with all of that. But thank you so much for being here, all of you. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. Such rich and interesting work. Thank you so much. We're going to do the little Zoom clap. Going to do it. There we go. Thank you. Great. Well, we come to the point in the evening where it is, what is it called? Final closing remarks. Okay, so the closing remarks, I guess, from the team. Wow, how do we close and how do we remark? There's a little bit of technicals just to first do for me to unspotlight some folk and re-spotlight others. So I'll just do a bit of that while we gather our thoughts, team.
It's where to begin, isn't it? It's interesting that one of the things that's come out for me listening to everybody is about the kind of different motivations people have to be able to do things differently. What is it that motivates you to want to try different ways of doing? Is it because there's a barrier in the way? Is it because you feel it's not possible to do within existing structures? Is it because you're moving away from something or because you're moving towards something? So that point of motivation, I think, I'd like to kind of consider that a little bit more. And just listening to some of the speakers today, you know, this notion that diversity and pluriversity by its very nature means complexity.
Yeah.
And I wonder the extent to which everybody has the appetite to be able to deal with things that are constantly changing and relational, and where it feels that everything's really slippery. It demands hard work, thought, care, attention and that's where I go back to that point about motivation. Who are the people and who are the communities that are motivated to want to think carefully about that? So that doesn't really draw anything together in any way, but it strikes me as something important that we might need to think about and attend to as a network. So.
Yeah.
For me, if I can jump in, what has really stayed with me is this, you know, what can be perceived as a tension between the kind of wanting to change the system and then dealing with the here and now. So going back, you know, and how do we resolve or deal with that tension in ways that are not kind of producing more frustration and more sense of failure and more kind of struggling within the structures that we operate within, but kind of thinking about it in more generative ways. So that image that Katia gave us of the horizon, that is also a praxis, so moving towards in a particular direction with a particular vision, but also acknowledging that that vision gets enacted and reenacted and potentially, goes back and forth and fails and tries again on a daily basis. So, whether it's the academic structure that feels unnecessarily hierarchical and disabling instead of enabling, how do we operate within it in ways that don't just produce further frustration and dissatisfaction with the system, but engage in a praxis that is a daily both resistance but also envisioning of a new way of operating and existing within it. I don't know how we do it, but how do we hold this potential of kind of what can exist in every choice that we make every day, every decision to act in a certain way, to think in a certain way, to communicate in a certain way, to collaborate in a certain way, which will not catapult us into the place of kind of having solved the problem, but it will be a constant engaging with it. And in doing so, also imagining a different way for that system to exist.
And I think just jumping onto that kind of thinking in a way, it's that, for me, it's that imagining otherwise, that trying to imagine different ways of looking around this problem or looking from underneath, as Katia was saying, and seeing what that perspective is like, which I think as kind of spatially engaged movement types that we're very good at. We're very good at imagining that and navigating around. So I think there's something in that, those kind of, I've written down smuggling and small incursions. The idea of smuggling came up earlier in the, I think it was from Julia's reference, and then Susan Sentner commented on that as well, as you kind of smuggling things in. Yeah, I don't for me, it's not about the grand gestures necessarily, because they feel like they're necessarily doomed to fail. But those sort of small weavings in and out of different ways of thinking, different ways of relating, and different ways of perceiving change. There was something, I don't know, Bio's talking tomorrow, but he posted something recently about a leaf falling away from a tree as kind of a process of degrowth, but a necessary process of degrowth. And then when that leaf falls away from the tree, nothing catastrophic happens. So maybe there's something about a movement away from, and whether that's a hard-faced kind of a deliberate counter move, or whether it's a subtle incursion, I don't know. But it might be something for us to think about alongside some of these pluriversal themes. Julie.
It's even just evident just from what we've heard today about the kind of richness within our dance ecology. And, you know, I'm more and more attracted to that idea that the complexity of some of the problems we face mean that there are not single answers to any of this, and that any answers we do find need to be diverse, and they need to be localized, and they need to be specific for the context and the communities that they serve. So by necessity, there needs to be a kind of mosaic of responses to deal with some of these things that are most pressing for us. Yeah.
Great. Julia, did you have anything to add at this stage, or still mulling?
There's an image of systems change that I ran across, and I apologize, the name of the person who came up with it is escaping me, but I will find it and put it on the Padlet. But it is that the idea that rather than kind of systems change by burning everything down, it's more like a tree root cracking a sidewalk and taking over. And so this image of, yeah, lots of different roots and different shapes and twining things, replacing through growth, through a generative process. And yeah, that's speaking to maybe something about replacing a kind of Western universalism with like a plurality of networking that feels maybe relevant. And don't forget to fill out the survey when you go.
Taking us back into the system. Fill out the survey before you go.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Impact agendas and
yeah, impact agendas
data
and get more money to do more work. Yeah. But I just wondered, well, first of all, thank you to our audience members who have stayed with us. Those of them who have been with us for the entire event today, great. We've got another marathon tomorrow. We've tried, and even then we'll only map a tiny part of the Pluriverse, the dance Pluriverse, but we've got some wonderful presentations coming up tomorrow. So either it would be great to have you there again, or tell your friends, and you know, they can come along too. And does anybody have a burning comment or something that they really feel from the audience that they have to get out at this moment? I would hate for that to be suppressed. Well, the Padlet is there. I'm going to save the chat. I'm going to do, you know, as much curation as possible. So please do keep joining us on this journey and the future events that are going to happen throughout the 18 months. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to all our contributors and to my wonderful co-facilitators. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and see you tomorrow, hopefully 9:30.
9:30. Should we stop the recording now?
Thank you.
Okay.